Rising on a steep, wooded hill above the old city of Granada, the Alhambra appears at first as a mighty reddish fortress, its high walls glowing in the sun and concealing an inner world of delicate beauty. Moorish poets once described this site as a pearl set in emeralds, likening the pale palace walls amid dark green woods to a jewel nestled in lush hills. In the soft light of dawn and dusk, the Alhambra's rammed earth ramparts take on a golden hue, and the sound of trickling water carries from its courtyards, creating a calm and almost dreamlike atmosphere. Across a narrow valley stands the old Albaycin quarter, the former Moorish neighborhood. Together, these two ancient heights form the medieval heart of Granada. Just to the east of the Alhambra's ramparts lie the terraced Generalife Gardens, the Jannat al-Arif, or Garden of the Architect, which served as a tranquil summer retreat for the Muslim emirs of Granada in the 13th and 14th centuries. Today, the Alhambra and Generalife offer more than just stunning views of the Sierra Nevada mountains. They are a journey back in time and an immersion into a serene aesthetic. The complex is one of the world's finest examples of medieval Islamic palace architecture, celebrated for its harmonious blend of nature, art, and engineering. Declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1984, the Alhambra remains a living monument, one that has endured through centuries of change, while preserving the spirit of Al-Andalus, the Islamic medieval civilization of Spain. In this long-form journey, we will explore the story of the Alhambra and the Generalife from their origins to the present day. Moving gently through history, architecture, daily life, and cultural symbolism, we will discover how these palaces and gardens became a symbol of ingenuity and an earthly vision of paradise. The tone is calm and reflective, inviting you to wander in imagination through quiet courtyards and fragrant groves, listening to the same fountains that have whispered their watery music for centuries. Origins in the Andalusian Middle Ages. The story of the Alhambra begins with its strategic setting and early fortifications. The hill called Sabica rises steeply above Granada's plain, protected by the Darro River at its base and by the high Sierra Nevada beyond. Its position made it a natural stronghold. Long before the Alhambra's palaces were built, this hill saw use as a citadel. Remains of ancient foundations suggest even the Romans may have recognized its defensive potential. By the 9th century, during the era of the Cordoba Emirate, a fortress known as Qalat Alhambra, the Red Castle, stood on Sabica Hill, small and rudimentary, but noted in poems of the time for its distinctive red walls. The name Alhambra itself derives from this Arabic term Alhamra, the red one, a reference to the color of the rammed earth and clay that make up its walls. In the 11th century, Granada was ruled by the Zirid dynasty. They built their own royal citadel on a neighboring hill, the Albaycin, and may have used the Sabica Hill fortress as an outpost. According to one account, a powerful Jewish vizier of the Zirids, Samuel ibn Nagrila, even built a palatial residence on the Sabica Hill, complete with gardens and water features, though nothing of it survives. These early chapters set the stage. By the time the Alhambra as we know it was conceived, the site already carried legends of hidden palaces and glittering treasures on the hill of the Red Fort. The founding of the Alhambra's dynasty came after a period of turmoil. In the early 13th century, The once powerful Almohad Empire in Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain, fractured, and Christian kingdoms pushed south in the campaigns of the Reconquista. In 1238, a skilled Andalusian leader named Muhammad ibn al-Ahmar, also known as Muhammad I al-Ghalib, or simply Ibn al-Ahmar, established himself as ruler of Granada amid the political vacuum. He became the first emir of the Nasrid dynasty, which would be the last Muslim dynasty in Iberia. Upon seizing power, Muhammad I chose the Old Red Hill as the nucleus for his new capital. He repaired and expanded the existing fortress, transforming it into the basis of a royal citadel. By reinforcing the walls and building new towers, he laid the groundwork for what would become a self-contained palace city. Crucially, Muhammad I also secured the lifeblood of the future Alhambra, its water supply. He commissioned the Acequia Real, the royal canal, to draw water from the Darro River several kilometers upstream and carry it up the heights of Sabika Hill. This ingenious aqueduct system allowed the barren hill to sustain gardens, fountains, and a large population, effectively making the desert bloom around the new palace. With water and walls in place, the Alhambra was ready to grow. Muhammad I's immediate successors continued to fortify and develop the site. His son Muhammad II, ruled 1273 to 1302, is credited with building some of the earliest Nasrid palaces and structures within the Alhambra. During the late 1200s, the citadel evolved into a true Medina city on the hill, a high-walled enclosure containing not just military barracks, but also homes, baths, a mosque, and markets for those who served the court. By the early 14th century, the Alhambra was no longer merely a fortress. It had become the full-time seat of the Emirate of Granada, a capital city in miniature. Chroniclers note that it encompassed two main zones: the Alcazaba, or military quarter, where the elite guard was housed, and the Palatine City, which included the royal palaces and residences of nobles and common folk living under the Sultan's protection. High defensive walls, studded with towers, encircled this mini-city, guarding its prosperity. Behind those ramparts, life thrived. Granada's first Nasrid rulers could walk through the alleys of their hilltop domain and find all the amenities of a thriving town. Workshops of artisans crafting fine silks and inlaid tiles, a Friday mosque calling the faithful to prayer, even a tannery curing leather for the bustling markets. The Alhambra, still in its infancy, was already developing the dual identity it would always retain, at once a castle of war and a palace of peace, a hard outer shell protecting an inner paradise. The Nasrid Golden Age, splendor in the 14th century. By the 14th century, the Emirate of Granada stood as the last remnant of Islamic rule in Iberia, a small but culturally rich kingdom hemmed in by Christian realms. It was during this period that the Alhambra reached its artistic and architectural zenith. A series of capable sultans of the Nasrid line poured their wealth and vision into refining the complex, resulting in the exquisite palaces that captivate the world to this day. Chief among these patrons were Sultan Yusuf I, reigned 1333 to 1354, and his son Muhammad V, reigned 1354 to 1391, whose reigns are considered the golden age of the Alhambra. Under their guidance, the Alhambra was embellished into a harmonious masterpiece of Islamic art and architecture, a paradise on earth brought to life in stone, wood, and water. Sultan Yusuf I was a wise and cultured ruler, and he initiated extensive building works to enhance both the defense and the beauty of the Alhambra. He strengthened the fortifications with new towers and gates, including the impressive Gate of Justice, Puerta de la Justicia, a grand horseshoe-arched entry finished in 1348, which still stands as one of the main entrances to the complex. But Yusuf I's legacy lies especially in the palatial structures he created. He ordered the construction of what was then called the Casa Real, Old Royal Palace, notably the section known today as the Palace of Comares. This palace, completed by 1370, centers on the serene court of the Myrtles, a rectangular courtyard with a long reflecting pool flanked by hedges of myrtle shrubs. On the pool's glassy surface, one sees mirrored the elegant arcades and the massive Comares Tower that rises at one end. It was in this Comares Tower that Yusuf I built the Hall of Ambassadors, the Alhambra's grand throne room, which he adorned with breathtaking craftsmanship, as we shall explore later. In addition, Yusuf I improved the livability of the palace city. He built public baths, hammams, for comfort and ritual purification, and he patronized mosques and educational facilities. During his reign, Granada's court became known for learning and literature. It was a time of relative peace and diplomatic balancing, when Granada often survived by skillfully negotiating truces and tributes with the more powerful Christian kingdom of Castile. Within the Alhambra, that peace was reflected in an efflorescence of culture. The quiet courtyards would often be alive with learned conversation, the chanting of poets, or the melodies of musicians. One of Yusuf's ministers, the poet and statesman Ibn al-Khatib, served as vizier and left eloquent descriptions of the palace's wonders. Another poet of the court, Ibn al-Jayyab, composed verses that were later inscribed onto the walls themselves. The Alhambra was becoming a living repository of Andalusian art and thought. Yusuf I's son, Muhammad V, continued this flourishing patronage with even greater impact. Muhammad V took the throne twice. His rule was interrupted by a coup, but restored, and presided over the completion of the Alhambra's most celebrated gem, the Palace of the Lions. In 1377, he commissioned the Court of the Lions, an innovative new palace court that epitomized the Nasrid synthesis of architecture and nature. This courtyard, slightly smaller than the Court of the Myrtles, was designed in a radically poetic way as a cruciform garden with a fountain at its heart. At the center, a large white marble basin is upheld by 12 carved marble lions, each spouting water from its mouth. From this fountain, 4 narrow water channels run outward across the courtyard's floor, dividing it into 4 parts. This layout symbolically represents the Quranic vision of paradise, with 4 rivers flowing out from a central source to water the gardens of Eden. Originally, the Court of the Lions was a verdant garden. Historical evidence suggests it was once filled with flowers or shrubs and perhaps orange trees in each corner, though later ages left it as a stark paved court for preservation reasons. Muhammad V's Lion's Court is surrounded by graceful arcades of slender columns and opens onto several halls of unequaled beauty. The Hall of the Two Sisters, Sala de las Dos Hermanas, the Hall of the Abencerrages, the Hall of Justice, and others, each richly ornamented. The Sultan ensured that every surface of these new rooms would be covered in intricate decoration, carved stucco, colorful tiles, and gentle Arabic inscriptions, creating an environment that feels almost weightless and otherworldly. The reign of Muhammad V was a high point, not just for architecture, but also for the cultural life of the Alhambra. He gathered around him a circle of brilliant scholars and poets. His vizier Ibn Zamrak was a gifted poet who composed verses specifically for the new palace. Ibn Zamrak's poetry, praising the beauty of the lion's fountain and the benevolence of the Sultan, was literally carved into the marble edges of the central fountain basin for all to see. One line of that inscription reads, "The fountain of the Sultan, which smothers with his graces all his subjects and lands, as the water wets the gardens." These words elegantly compare the ruler's generosity to life-giving water, an apt metaphor in a palace where water was everywhere flowing. Under Muhammad V, the Alhambra bloomed as a center of art, science, and diplomacy. It was said that ambassadors from Christian and Muslim lands alike were received with equal courtesy in the Hall of Ambassadors, overawed by the splendor of their surroundings. The Kingdom of Granada may have been politically fragile, often surviving by paying tribute to Castile, but within the walls of the Alhambra, a refined courtly civilization thrived. The palaces built in this golden age, comares and lions, remain the crown jewels of the Alhambra complex, their form largely unchanged since the 14th century. They exemplify the Nasrid motto inscribed on many walls, "Wala Ghalib illallah," there is no victor but God. Despite all earthly glory, the inscriptions remind us the Nasrid sultans acknowledged a higher power. This humility before the divine was woven subtly into the exuberant luxury of their surroundings. As the 15th century dawned, however, clouds gathered on Granada's horizon. The later Nasrid period was marked by internal strife and external threat. Succession disputes and court intrigues weakened the dynasty. In one notorious incident, a feud between noble families led to the alleged massacre of the Abencerrages clan inside the Alhambra. A legend says that the reddish stains in the marble fountain of the Abencerrages Hall are the blood of those knights, though in truth it is likely mineral discoloration. Such tales, whether true or not, speak to the growing atmosphere of intrigue and fatal conflict in the last days of the emirate. Meanwhile, the Christian kingdoms to the north had united through the marriage of Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon. By the 1480s, these Catholic monarchs were determined to complete the Reconquista by conquering Granada, the last Islamic bastion. The Nasrid Sultan at that time, Abu Abdallah Muhammad XII, better known by the Spanish nickname Boabdil, faced an almost impossible task defending his diminishing borders. The Alhambra still stood proud and seemingly impregnable on its hill, but it was now a jewel, isolated in a land rapidly falling to enemy hands. The fall of Granada and the end of Muslim rule, 1492. In the year 1491, Granada found itself under siege. Ferdinand and Isabella's forces encircled the city, and after months of resistance, Boabdil entered into negotiations. Finally, on January 2nd, 1492, the last Moorish sultan surrendered Granada to the Catholic monarchs in a formal ceremony that marked the end of nearly 8 centuries of Muslim rule in Iberia. It is a moment that has been etched into legend and art as much as recorded in history. Boabdil, then a young ruler in his 20s, handed the keys of the Alhambra to King Ferdinand, reportedly uttering, "Now there is nothing left to us except the cielos, heavens." The Christian victors raised their flags, the banner of Castile and the standard of St. James, above the Alhambra's tallest watchtower, the Torre de la Vela, signifying that Granada was now theirs. The transition was both peaceful and heartrending. Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand entered the Alhambra and were astonished by its beauty. Chronicles note that the Catholic monarchs were so impressed by the palaces that they ordered them spared from looting or destruction. Indeed, unlike the fate of many conquered cities, Granada's exquisite mosques and palaces were not razed outright. The new rulers recognized the Alhambra as a treasure of architecture. They even held their royal court there for a time. The Alhambra briefly became the seat of the unified Spanish monarchy. It was in the Alhambra's Hall of Ambassadors, according to tradition, that Queen Isabella in April 1492 granted audience to Christopher Columbus and ultimately gave her approval for his famous voyage across the Atlantic. Thus, this palace built by Muslim kings became the stage for a pivotal chapter of the emerging Spanish Empire. Yet for the vanquished, the loss of the Alhambra was steeped in sorrow. There is a poignant legend known as El's Suspiro del Moro, the Moor's sigh. As Boabdil left Granada with his entourage, bound for exile in the Alpujarra Mountains, he supposedly rode to a last lookout point on the road. From that hill, which locals still call the last sigh of the Moor, he gazed back at the Alhambra one final time. Overwhelmed by emotion, Boabdil sighed deeply and wept at the sight of his lost kingdom. His mother, the story goes, reproached him, saying, "You do well to weep like a woman for what you could not defend like a man." True or not, the tale captures the deep cultural bereavement at the fall of Granada. Generations of Spaniards, both Muslim and Christian, would remember that moment, one side with nostalgia for a lost paradise, the other with the triumphalism of a reconquest completed. The hill from which Boabdil looked back is still called El Suspiro del Moro, and one can imagine the young ex-sultan's heartbreak as the Alhambra's red walls and slender towers receded into the distance amid the cypress groves. For the Alhambra itself, 1492 was not an end, but a turning of the page. The Catholic monarchs took control of the complex and ensured its preservation, but inevitably changes followed. The great mosque of the Alhambra, which had stood within the palace city, was consecrated as a Catholic church and later replaced by a new church of Santa Maria within the grounds. Isabella and Ferdinand established a royal household in the Alhambra. They lodged administrators and began to integrate the Nasrid palaces into their own style of court life. The structures of the Alhambra were largely left intact at first. Indeed, early Spanish visitors, like cleric Hernando de Talavera, wrote admiringly of the palaces. But some modifications were made to suit Christian use. Certain chambers of the mexuar, the council hall, were converted into a chapel, and religious images and altars appeared in rooms once decorated only with Quranic verses. The Generalife, too, remained a place of leisure. The conquerors enjoyed its gardens and cool breezes just as the emirs had, though the Generalife's small mosque was now gone. In 1526, a dramatic architectural project was begun that would forever change the Alhambra's skyline. The young King Carlos V, known also as Emperor Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, visited Granada with his bride and was captivated by the Alhambra's charm. Desiring a permanent residence in this idyllic setting, Charles V ordered the construction of a new Renaissance palace right next to the Nasrid palaces. The Palace of Charles V was designed in a boldly classical style by Pedro Machuca, a square, massive structure of stone with a circular courtyard in its center, exemplifying high Renaissance form. Its construction involved the demolition of some minor Nasrid buildings in the area known as the Mexuar and perhaps the old harem quarters. Built of heavy golden brown masonry and entirely distinct in style from the delicate Moorish work around it, the Palace of Charles V was a statement of the new order. Where the Nasrid sultans had created an intimate paradise, the Christian emperor wished to impose a monumental symbol of imperial power. The project, however, suffered many delays. Charles V's palace was never fully completed, construction halted by the early 17th century, and for a long time it stood as a roofless shell within the Alhambra. To this day, its robust form sits incongruously amid the older Moorish structures, a Renaissance transplant in a medieval Nasrid garden. Through the 1500s and 1600s, the Alhambra remained in use, but its glory days had faded. The later Habsburg and Bourbon monarchs of Spain paid less attention to distant Granada. The Alhambra's condition began to decline. Portions of the vast complex were adapted for assorted purposes. Some palaces were turned into military headquarters, or barracks, storerooms, or the residences of local governors. The former monastery of San Francisco was established within the complex, in a building that had once been a Nasrid palace, further altering the character of the place. Over time, neglect set in. Roofs leaked, gardens grew wild or dried up, and some architectural details crumbled without regular maintenance. Worse was yet to come during the Napoleonic Wars. In the early 19th century, Granada was occupied by Napoleonic French troops, 1808 to 1812. The Alhambra, being a fortress, was used as a barracks and powder magazine. When the French were finally forced to withdraw in 1812, they decided to sabotage the Alhambra's military usefulness. Sections of the complex were blown up, notably parts of the outer fortifications, and several towers were damaged or destroyed by gunpowder. A portion of the beautiful palace of the Partal and other areas in what is now called the Secano, dry allotment, were also reduced to ruins. It is said that the entire complex nearly escaped total destruction only because a wounded French soldier left behind in the Alhambra diffused remaining charges at the last moment. By 1820, the once splendid palaces were in a sorry state. Some roofs had collapsed, water conduits were broken, and the abandoned halls were invaded by bats and birds. Locals moved into the empty palaces, turning them into makeshift homes or taverns. Travelers reported laundry lines strung in the court of the Myrtles and goats wandering through roofless chambers. The Alhambra, which had begun as a symbol of Nasrid power and then housed Christian courts, had fallen into a romantic decay, its fate hanging in uncertainty. Rediscovery, romanticism, and preservation, 19th to 20th centuries. Ironically, it was the Alhambra's very decay and mystery that sparked its revival. In the 19th century, the ruined palace city atop Granada captured the imagination of romantic writers and artists from Europe and America. They came in search of the picturesque and the sublime, and they found it in the Alhambra's empty courtyards and overgrown gardens. The most famous of these visitors was the American writer Washington Irving, who stayed for a time in the Alhambra in 1828, when parts of the palace were being used as a boarding house. Irving wandered by moonlight through the silent halls and listened to local tales. The experience moved him deeply. He went on to write Tales of the Alhambra, published 1832, a collection of essays, legends, and sketches that wonderfully captured the spell of the place. Irving's book was widely read in Europe and North America, igniting international interest in Spain's Moorish heritage and in the Alhambra in particular. Other romantic artists soon followed. British painters like David Roberts sketched its arcades. French writers like Chateaubriand praised its charm. The Alhambra became an essential stop on the 19th century grand tour of Spain. Its image propagated through engravings and early photographs. As one 19th century observer noted, the Alhambra has become the most oft described of Muslim monuments, an icon of exotic splendor in decay. This rising appreciation created momentum to save and restore the site. Official efforts to protect the Alhambra began around the same time. In 1828, while Irving was writing his tales, the Spanish King Ferdinand VII commissioned architect José Contreras to undertake emergency repairs in the Alhambra. This marked the start of a long line of conservators. Contreras and his family, his son and grandson after him, would serve as architects of the Alhambra for much of the 19th century. However, the early restorations followed the romantic notions of the era rather than strict historical accuracy. The Contreras architects aimed not only to repair, but also to enhance the Alhambra's Arabian character as they imagined it. They sometimes introduced new decorative elements that were not originally there, in an effort to make the palaces appear completely ornate and intact. For example, in 1858 to 59, Rafael Contreras added a fanciful plaster and wood dome in the Court of the Lions, designed in a vaguely Persian style to replace what he thought might have been an original covering. He also installed a similar dome in the Court of the Myrtles' northern portico. These domes, while beautiful to some, had no basis in Nasrid design. The medieval lion's court was open to the sky. Such stylistic restorations, as they were called, were common in the 1800s across Europe's heritage sites. They aimed to present a monument in an idealized completeness, even if it meant conjecture or creative addition. In the Alhambra's case, these romantic era changes were later viewed critically. Still, one must credit the Contreras family for stabilizing collapsing structures and keeping the Alhambra in the public eye during a turbulent century. In 1870, the Alhambra was officially declared a national monument of Spain, ensuring state funds for its upkeep. This recognition came shortly after a revolution in Spain that deposed Queen Isabella II. During the political upheaval, the Alhambra, which had been crown property, passed to the nation. Despite limited resources, conservation continued in fits and starts. By the turn of the 20th century, there was a growing sense among scholars and architects that a more scientific approach to restoration was needed. The decorative improvements of the past were coming under scrutiny as potentially misleading. In 1907, the Spanish government appointed a new chief architect for the Alhambra, Modesto Shendoya, who attempted some reforms but met resistance and had limited success. The real turning point came in 1923 with the appointment of Leopoldo Torres Balbas as the director of Alhambra Conservation. Torres Balbas was a trained archaeologist and art historian, and he is often considered the father of modern restoration at the Alhambra. Embracing new international principles, such as those in the Athens Charter of 1931, Torres Balbas prioritized authenticity and scientific rigor. He halted the practice of fanciful reconstructions, instead focusing on preserving what remained and carefully reconstructing only where solid evidence existed. During his tenure from 1923 to 1936, Torres Balbas undertook painstaking work. He removed the 19th century fake domes added to the Nasrid courts, restoring them to their original appearance. He repaired roofs using traditional techniques and materials, fixed delicate stucco and tile work that was deteriorating, and importantly, he conducted archaeological excavations on the palace grounds. These digs uncovered the foundations of long-lost structures, like the Palace of the Abencerrages and older sections of the Partal, greatly enhancing understanding of the Alhambra's original layout. Torres Balbas also documented inscriptions and design elements systematically. If a tile mosaic had a missing section, he would replace it with plain plaster rather than a conjectural design, so that the viewer could distinguish original from restored, a practice aligning with modern conservation ethics. Thanks to his work, many errors of previous restorers were corrected. It's often said that Torres Balbas saved the Alhambra by establishing maintenance routines and securing its historical integrity. After Torres Balbas, his assistant Francisco Prieto Moreno continued the conservation efforts until 1970, further professionalizing the care of the monument. A new governing body, the Patronato de la Alhambra, was formed in 1914, reorganized in 1940, to oversee the complex, and it remains in charge today. Through the mid-20th century, the Alhambra underwent additional repairs, especially after events like a 1950 earthquake that caused some damage. International recognition of its importance grew. In 1984, UNESCO inscribed the Alhambra and Generalife as a World Heritage Site, calling attention to its universal cultural value. By the late 20th century, millions of people were coming to Granada to experience the Alhambra's magic, necessitating careful visitor management and ongoing restoration to mitigate wear and tear. Research on the Alhambra also accelerated, with art historians, architects, and scientists collaborating to study its plasterwork, pigments, and structural techniques in detail. For example, projects by the Victoria and Albert Museum and local conservators to analyze Nasrid plaster and ceramics. The work of preservation is unending. Even in recent decades, specialists have cleaned and stabilized the delicate stucco walls, restored wooden ceilings, and improved the water drainage to protect the foundations. Significant projects have included the restoration of the Court of the Lions and its fountain, completed in 2012, in which the fountain's plumbing was revamped and the basin's original marble sheen revealed after removing centuries of calcification. The Generalife Gardens, too, have been maintained and partially replanted to evoke their historic appearance within the limits of modern climate and conservation needs. Thanks to these efforts, visiting the Alhambra today, one can still walk through the very halls of Yusuf I and Muhammad V, their ornamentation largely intact and shimmering, and sense the atmosphere of tranquility and grandeur they created. From a crumbling, abandoned complex in the early 1800s, the Alhambra has been transformed into a meticulously cared-for monument by the early 2000s. It stands not only as a proud symbol of Granada, but as one of the most cherished historical sites in the world. Each year, the Alhambra and Generalife receive a vast number of visitors. In 2023, they reached a record of roughly 2.6 million tourists, all coming to admire the legacy of Moorish Spain. Balancing access with preservation is a delicate task. Only a limited number of tickets are issued per day to prevent excessive wear, and certain vulnerable areas are periodically closed for restoration. The ongoing commitment of researchers and conservators ensures that the gentle play of light on Andalusian tilework, the cool splash of fountains, and the silent poetry of Arabic inscriptions will continue to enchant future generations as they have enchanted the past. Having traced the historical trajectory of the Alhambra, we now turn to explore the spaces themselves, the architecture and design that make this royal city such a triumph of human creativity. Design and architecture of the Alhambra. Entering the Alhambra is like stepping into a carefully crafted work of art, one that balances monumental scale with intimate detail. The architecture of the Nasrid palaces adheres to a consistent vision shaped by centuries of Moorish tradition. Above all, it is inward-looking. The most important spaces are organized around courtyards, hidden behind plain fortress walls. As a visitor moves through the Alhambra, he or she experiences a rhythmic alternation between enclosed, shadowy chambers and open, sunlit courts filled with greenery or water. This was by design. In Islamic architecture of this period, the courtyard's patio was the central module around which palaces were arranged. Each palace is essentially a sequence of such courts and the halls that surround them. The courtyards not only provide light and ventilation, but also serve as symbolic microcosms of paradise, especially when adorned with fountains or reflective pools at their center. One striking aspect of the Alhambra's design is the stark contrast between its exterior and interior. From the outside, the complex presents as a solid red-orange fortress with battlements and massive blank walls, a military stronghold. But pass through one of its gates, and the interior unfolds as a world of refinement and intricate decoration. Contemporary accounts and modern studies emphasize that the Nasrid architects deliberately left exteriors austere while lavishing attention on interiors. In the Alhambra, the true magnificence is reserved for those who enter the inner sanctums. There, within private courts and halls, nearly every surface was originally covered with ornament, colorful ceramic tiles, carved plaster arabesques, carved and painted wood ceilings, and filigree lattice windows. Light and air flow freely through slender columns and arches into these spaces, erasing the boundary between building and nature. The overall effect was to create an earthly paradise hidden within a fortress, a secret garden of art accessible only to the court and its guests. As one wanders inside, soft daylight filters through mucharabia screens, and between columns, breeze and birdsong enter along with the scent of flowers, and water shimmers in pools, engaging all the senses. It is a design that is as functional as it is symbolic. The thick outer walls protect against the harsh sun and potential sieges, while the interior open plan cools the air and provides serene courtyards for contemplation. This duality is the essence of the Alhambra's architecture. The layout of the Alhambra evolved over time, but by the end of the Nasrid period, it had many components. Shaped roughly like a ship, about 740 meters long and 205 meters at its widest, the complex stretches along the Sabika Ridge from west to east. On the western end stands the original Alcazaba, the fortress within the fortress. The Alcazaba is the oldest part of the Alhambra, consisting of massive defensive towers like the Torre de la Vela, watchtower, and thick ramparts with crenellations. Inside the Alcazaba are the remains of barracks and cisterns that served the military garrison. Climbing the narrow steps of the Torre de la Vela today, one is rewarded with a panoramic view of Granada below, the same vantage point from which Nasrid lookouts once scanned for approaching armies. The Alcazaba's construction is robust and functional, with little ornament. Its job was to guard, and indeed it long served as the first line of defense on the Alhambra's vulnerable west flank. Proceeding eastward from the Alcazaba, one enters the palace area proper, the heart of Alhambra's Medina. This zone held several Nasrid palaces, built adjacently by different rulers. Historical sources indicate there were at least 6 major palace complexes here during the Nasrid era, though only a few remain substantially intact after centuries of change. The 4 best preserved structures are known today as the Mekshwar, the Comares Palace, the Palace of the Lions, and the Partal Palace. It's important to note that many of the names used, for example, Hall of Ambassadors, Court of the Lions, Hall of the Two Sisters, were given by later visitors or scholars, not by the Nasrids themselves. The original Arabic names of these spaces are largely lost to time, which adds to the mystique. We walk through rooms whose true name and purpose we can only guess from context. Let us stroll, then, through these palaces as they exist. First comes the Meksuar, which one encounters soon after entering from the Gate of Justice side. The Meksuar, from Maswar, the Arab term for a council or administrative hall, was effectively the business area of the palace, where the Sultan's ministers met and where justice was dispensed. It is a relatively small complex of rooms, and over centuries it suffered alterations. Part of it was converted into a chapel by the Christians, which has since been partially undone. Nonetheless, the Mexuar Hall still displays the Nasrid aesthetic. It has a simple, square floor plan with a central marble fountain and is notable for its mukarabes, mukarnas decoration, on the entryway, giving it the name Hall of the Mokarabes. The Mexuar's design actually shows a blend of influences. Some of its decor was completed after the Reconquista, so one sees Renaissance-style wooden doors alongside Arabic inscriptions on the walls. This mix testifies to how the Catholic monarchs respected and preserved much of the Moorish design while making practical adaptations. In the Mexuar's antechamber, for instance, there is a balcony with a delicate screen that likely allowed the Sultan or his officials to listen to proceedings or observe petitioners without being seen, a clever device for maintaining aura and security. Passing through the Mexuar, one reaches the Palace of Comares, which is entered via the striking court of the Myrtles, Patio de los Arrayanes. This palace was primarily the royal diwan, the formal reception and throne halls of the Nasrid sultans. The court of the Myrtles is quintessential Alhambra, a large, open rectangular courtyard centered on a long reflecting pool of still water. On either side of the pool are low hedges of myrtle, their dark green leaves giving the courtyard its name and a pleasant fragrance, especially in summer heat. The design is elegant and minimal, just water, greenery, and the clear Andalusian sky above. Yet it achieves a near mystical beauty. The arches and slender columns at the courtyard's ends are perfectly mirrored in the pool's surface, creating a symmetrical vision that doubles the apparent space. As light shifts through the day, the reflections and the interplay of shadow and sun animate the arcade's shapes, an ever-changing visual poetry. Historical accounts mention that originally the myrtle hedges might have been sunken slightly to avoid obstructing the view across the water, and at one point rose bushes were planted here, later removed to maintain the austere harmony of the design. On the north side of the court of the Myrtles rises the Comares Tower, the tallest structure in the Alhambra complex. Inside this tower is the Salón de los Embajadores, the Hall of the Ambassadors, which was the throne room of the Nasrids, and remains one of the most breathtaking interiors in the Alhambra. Entering the Hall of Ambassadors, one is enveloped in a grand yet intimate space, a perfect square chamber about 12 meters on each side. The walls are lined with stucco carvings up to a great height, intricate geometric patterns, and flowing Arabic script praising God and the Sultan. The hall has a series of arched windows set surprisingly low to the floor. Recall that people sat on carpets and cushions, so the windows were placed at eye level for seated persons. Through these windows, the sunlight streams in, and one can gaze out over the Albaicin Quarter or the distant plain, a reminder of the realm beyond the palace. Most impressive of all is the ceiling of the Hall of Ambassadors. It is a domed composition of inlaid cedar wood, arranged in a radiant pattern of stars upon stars. Over 8,000 tiny pieces of wood, in different colors and essences, create a cosmic diagram representing the seven heavens, of the Islamic cosmos, or perhaps the night sky full of stars. Standing beneath this cedar cupola, a visitor feels as if looking up into a dark firmament punctuated by shimmering constellations. Indeed, the ceiling symbolically places the Sultan's throne, which stood along one wall, under the highest heaven, aligning his rule with the celestial order. The intricate pattern also showcases the Nasrid's advanced understanding of geometry and craftsmanship. The walls of this hall carry inscriptions from the Quran and poetic verses. One common motif on the walls throughout the Alhambra is the phrase, "There is no victor but God," repeated as a reminder of divine sovereignty above earthly kings. In sum, the Hall of Ambassadors was meant to overawe visitors, and it still does. When foreign emissaries in the 14th century came to negotiate treaties or offer tribute, they would be led across the cool court of the Myrtles and into this magnificent hall where the Sultan of Granadas, robed in silk and gold, sat against a backdrop of arabesque walls and under a heaven of wood and light. It is not hard to imagine the psychological impact of such an environment on diplomacy. Connected to the Comares Palace via a passage is the Palace of the Lions, the private residential palace of Muhammad V. The transition from Comares to Lions is subtle. A modest vestibule leads you out to the famous Court of the Lions, which we described partially in the historical section. This court is rectangular, but with a pronounced cross-axial design. A broad arcade on all four sides and pavilions jutting out at the center of each side, supported by clusters of marble columns. At the very heart stands the Fountain of the Lions. The fountain consists of a large round basin of white Meckel marble, supported on the backs of 12 sculpted lions in a circle, each lion a stylized representation with a grim, powerful expression. From the mouths of these marble lions, water spouts forth, feeding the basin and the four runnels that channel water across the courtyard in the cardinal directions. The symbolism here is rich. The four water channels quarter the courtyard, evoking the Quranic paradise, divided by rivers of water, milk, honey, and wine. The number of lions, 12, and the general layout deliberately hearken to the description of King Solomon's legendary throne, which in biblical tales sat on a platform supported by 12 lions. In fact, a legend long persisted that the lion fountain was originally a gift from a Jewish vizier, perhaps from that 11th century palace of Samuel ha-Nagid, and that the design emulated Solomon's seat of wisdom. Modern research, however, shows the fountain's materials date to the 14th century, indicating it was created for Muhammad V's palace. Regardless, the invocation of Solomon through the lions symbolizes justice and wisdom, values the Nasrid ruler would have wanted to associate with his reign. An inscription by Ibn Zamrak around the fountain's rim actually brings the lions to life in verse, boasting, "Never have there been, nor shall there ever be, such another fountain, for the like of it is not to be found in any other place," and describing how the water seems to have been turned to solid sparkling silver as it pours. The poetry playfully has one lion asking, "Say, which is more notable, the lion or the water that flows from it," blurring art and nature. Surrounding the court of the lions are a series of exquisite chambers. On the north side is the Hall of the Two Sisters, named for two large twin marble floor slabs. This hall likely served as part of the private quarters of the Sultan's family, perhaps the rooms of the Sultana or royal wives. It contains one of the Alhambra's most astonishing ceilings, a massive muqarnas vault shaped from thousands of plaster prisms to form a stalactite-like dome above the entire room. When sunlight enters through the windows at the dome's base, the multitude of facets catch the light and create a dazzling effect, like a crystalline cave or a cloud of glitter suspended overhead. The symbolic intention might be to represent the heavens or the infinite complexity of creation. Standing beneath it, one indeed feels a sense of celestial vastness. Opposite, on the south side of the courtyard, is the Hall of the Abencerrages, which mirrors the Hall of Two Sisters in form and also features a magnificent muqarnas dome. A legend associated with this hall, as mentioned earlier, tells of a tragic massacre of the Abencerrages knights by a jealous sultan. The rusty stains in the basin of the hall's central fountain are said in folklore to be their blood. While this is likely apocryphal, it adds a layer of romantic mystery to the space. The hall's beauty itself needs no embellishment. Its ceiling is another symphony of honeycombed plaster, and the walls are covered in delicate ornament. Between these two great halls lies the Mirador of Linda Raja, a small lookout room with a splendid view of a lower garden. The Mirador, meaning lookout, has a large arched window framing a living picture of the cypress trees and flowers outside. This kind of viewpoint shows the integration of architecture with landscape. The Alhambra's designers treated views as artistic compositions. The Palace of the Lions overall represents the pinnacle of Nasrid palatial architecture. It is somewhat more intimate and organically laid out than the formal Komari's palace. Its channels of water, fountains in multiple rooms, and carved poems make it feel like a livable garden sanctuary. Christian visitors in the 16th century were so impressed that they likened it to a fairy tale. Notably, the layout of the Lion's Palace, a rectangular four-part courtyard, might have been influenced by contemporary Christian cloister design. Some scholars point out parallels to the Patio de las Doncellas in Seville's Alcazar, showing a cross-cultural interplay. Yet the concept of a Chaharbagh, a fourfold garden, is also deeply Islamic, harking back to Persian gardens. Thus, the Court of Lions embodies a fusion of influences and the Nasrid openness to aesthetic ideas beyond their own tradition. Further east from the Lion's Palace, the ground descends in terraces. Here one finds the Partal Palace, or rather, the remains of it. The Partal is the oldest surviving palace section, parts date to the early 14th century under Muhammad III, and it consists of a lovely portico of 5 arches overlooking a large reflective pool. This portico, with its slender columns and broad arches, is often photographed with its mirror image rippling in the pond below. The name Partal comes from portico, or perhaps the Arabic al-Burtal, meaning the portico gallery. Next to it stands the Torre de las Damas, Tower of the Ladies, which was incorporated into a later structure. Though much of the Partal's residential quarters are gone, the area around it, known as the Partal's Gardens, is landscaped with hedges, roses, and fountains, where peacocks sometimes roam. Strolling through, one might find fragments of former palaces that are now just low walls and outlines, silent hints of the Alhambra's fuller past beyond the four main palaces we see. For instance, excavations have revealed the foundations of the Palace of Yusuf III and others that once filled this eastern section. Today, they are serene archaeological gardens with fig and pomegranate trees growing where Nasrid nobility once dwelled. Encircling all these palaces are the curtain walls of the Alhambra, strengthened by numerous towers that double as mini palaces or guard posts. Some towers along the northern ramparts, facing the city, were actually used as private retreats or residences for high-ranking persons. A fine example is the Torre de la Infanta and the Torre de las Infantas, elegant towers with small chambers inside, decorated with the same stucco and tile as the main palaces, offering secluded spaces with windows opening to vast views. On the southern wall stands the Torre de la Cautiva, Tower of the Captive, and Torre de las Damas. These also hide beautiful rooms within. The use of towers as living quarters reflects how every part of the Alhambra was utilized for aesthetic and practical purposes. Even the defensive structures were not purely martial. They were integrated into the palace city's life, providing vantage points, private escapes, or occasionally prison cells, as one might guess from names like Tower of the Captive, which legend associates with an imprisoned Christian princess, though its decoration suggests it was a luxurious boudoir, not a dungeon. We should also note the Gate of Justice, Puerta de la Justicia, on the south wall, one of the Alhambra's iconic portals built by Yusuf I in 1348. It is a massive horseshoe arch crowned by a triumphal arch shape, and on its keystone is carved a hand, while a key is carved on the arch above. Symbols wrapped in legend. According to lore, the hand and key are talismans, the hand representing the hand of Fatima, or perhaps the 5 pillars of Islam, and the key symbolizing either the key to heaven or the key that would fall from the hand on Judgment Day, allowing the virtuous to enter. Another legend goes that if ever the hand and the key align, if the carved hand were ever to touch the carved key, the Alhambra would crumble and the world end. Such myths underscore the aura of magic and prophecy that clings to the Alhambra's architecture. The Gate of Justice also had a more secular legend. It was said that no enemy could conquer Granada unless he managed to insert his finger into the sculpted stone hand overhead, an impossible feat. These stories show how the people of Granada, even after the Reconquista, viewed the Alhambra with a mix of reverence and superstition, ascribing protective power to its very stones. In summary, the architecture of the Alhambra's palaces is characterized by a unity of design centered on courtyards, a masterful use of water and open space, and an interior richness of detail that contrasts with external simplicity. Construction materials were often simple, plaster, wood, and tile, but crafted to look like lace or jewels. The Nasrid builders worked with what was available. Granada is not rich in fine stone, for example, using brick and plaster for structure, then skinning surfaces and decorative finishes. The result was visually stunning, but also relatively fragile. This ephemeral quality is part of the Alhambra's charm. It was once described as music frozen in stone, and indeed there is a rhythmic, almost musical cadence to its repeating patterns and its alternation of solids and voids. The color palette of the Alhambra's decoration deserves mention. Although today much of the plaster and wood has faded to neutral tones, In the 14th century, the interiors were a riot of colors. Contemporary descriptions and modern analyses reveal that the stucco reliefs were originally painted in vibrant hues, deep blues, lapis lazuli, or cobalt pigments, reds, greens, and gilded with gold leaf. The tiles, alicatos, that line the lower walls still show their colors, glossy whites, blues, ochres, and blacks, arranged in complex geometric mosaics. The wooden ceilings likewise were painted and gilded. Imagine the court of the Myrtles, with the white stucco arches picked out in blue and gold patterns, or the Hall of the Two Sisters, where the Muqarna's dome might have twinkled with painted stars and golden highlights catching lamplight. Though time has softened the spectacle, one can still see traces of paint in protected nooks, and restorers using gentle cleaning have occasionally uncovered astonishing patches of original color. The exteriors, conversely, remained the earthen red of the tapia, rammed earth, construction, which gave the Alhambra its name. This philosophy, plain outside, splendid inside, had both practical and spiritual rationales. Practical because overly ornate exteriors might attract unwanted attention or weather poorly. Spiritual or cultural because in Islamic tradition, ostentation is often reserved for private enjoyment, not public display, and perhaps as a metaphor that true beauty lies within. From a defensive fortress to a cluster of palaces, from sheer walls to filigree domes, the architecture of the Alhambra is a unified expression of the Nasrid worldview. It provided security, functionality, and unparalleled beauty. The surviving structures allow us to step into the shoes of the emirs and their retinue, to sit by a fountain under a scalloped arch and gaze at reflections, feeling the same tranquility they engineered so long ago. In the next section, we will delve into those fountains and gardens, specifically exploring the Generalife and the ingenious water system that made the Alhambra a lush oasis on a dry hill. Gardens and water, the Generalife and the paradise on earth. Water is the soul of the Alhambra and Generalife. In an environment where summers are hot and rain scarce, the Nasrid emirs harnessed engineering and artistry to create a cool, green refuge that must have felt like heaven on earth. Gardens, both inside the Alhambra and at the adjoining Generalife estate, were integral to the design, not mere adornments, but living spaces that fused with the architecture. The very word Generalife, Jannat al-Arifa in Arabic, often interpreted as Garden of the Architect, or perhaps Garden of the Jinn, paradise, contains Jannat, meaning garden or paradise. In Islamic culture, gardens carry profound symbolism. The Quran describes paradise, al-Firdaus, as a garden with shade, fruits, and rivers flowing beneath the trees. The Nasrids endeavored to recreate a slice of that paradise in Granada, both to enjoy in this life and to evoke the promise of the hereafter. Supplying and choreographing water was the first challenge. The Alhambra's location atop a hill meant that water had to be brought from elsewhere. The solution was the construction of the Acequia Real, Royal Canal, also called Acequia del Sultan, an ambitious irrigation canal that diverted water from the Darro River about 6 to 8 kilometers east of the Alhambra in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. This canal, built in the 13th century under Muhammad I or II, wound along contours and through tunnels, carrying water across ravines by aqueduct, and finally arriving at the ridge of the Cerro del Sol hill where the Generalife is located. From there, the water split into branches. One branch, the Acequia del Tercio, ran higher and helped irrigate the upper Generalife terraces. The main branch flowed to the Patio de la Acequia, the court of the canal, in the Generalife itself. After feeding the Generalife's ponds and gardens, the channels joined again and crossed into the Alhambra proper via an arched aqueduct near the water tower, Torre del Agua, on the eastern wall. Once inside the fortress, the water was distributed through a complex network of open rills, underground clay pipes, sluices, and storage cisterns to reach every part of the palaces and even the city quarter. This system was astoundingly sophisticated for its time. It included features like settling tanks to let sediment sink out, ensuring clean water, and overflow channels or safety valves to divert excess water during floods, preventing damage. Cisterns, aljibs, not only stored water, but also acted as cooling and filtration systems as water percolated and aerated within them. Thus, the Alhambra always had access to fresh, cool water, a precious resource turned into an artistic medium. With water abundant, the Nasrids cultivated a series of gardens that must have seemed miraculous against the arid summer landscape of Andalusia. Within the Alhambra walls, nearly every palace had its courtyard garden. We have already described the myrtle hedges of the Comares court and the originally gardened court of lions. Another delightful small garden is the Patio de Lindaraja, adjacent to the Hall of Two Sisters. Lindaraja is a later arrangement. In its current form, partly the result of Christian-era modifications in the 16th century, but it encapsulates the ideal of an Islamic courtyard garden, a quadripartite layout, 4 flower beds around a central fountain, bordered by trimmed hedges and orange trees, offering a cool retreat just steps away from the ornately decorated halls. A fountain bubbles gently at the center, providing the soothing sound of water. In the spring, the orange blossoms perfume the air. In summer, the dense foliage casts deep shade. The Lindaraja Garden's name means Eye of Aixa, or perhaps comes from a romantic character in one of Irving's tales. But standing there, one feels the true protagonists are the water, the greenery, and the dappled light. An oasis for the senses. As one observer wrote, a cool, green, shaded, formal garden arranged around a gentle fountain spilling from a shallow bowl, box hedges, agapanthus, and mature citrus bearing glowing oranges, cypress trees tower overhead. The scene has changed little over the centuries, except that today some of those ancient cypresses are giants far taller than in Nasrid times, and a few modern ornamental plants have been added or removed by various gardeners. Moving outside the main Alhambra walls to the Generalife, we find the most extensive gardens. The Generalife was a country estate for the emirs, a place to escape the formalities of court life and enjoy leisure in a more rustic setting. It was first built in the late 13th century, some sources say by Muhammad II or III, and modified in the early 14th century by Ismail I. The Generalife occupies a sloping site on the Cerro del Sols, Hill of the Sun, separated from the Alhambra by a steep ravine but connected via pathways and the Acequia aqueduct. The complex originally was enclosed by its own walls and included agricultural terraces olive groves, perhaps small vineyards and hunting grounds on the hillside beyond. What remains today of the Generalife's structures is mainly the palace of the Generalife, which is relatively small and simple compared to the Alhambra palaces and its immediately surrounding gardens. The Generalife Palace consists of two main pavilions, north and south, which stand at either end of the famous Patio de la Acequia, the court of the water channel. This elongated courtyard is the centerpiece of the Generalife and one of the most celebrated gardens in Europe. The Patio de la Acequia is essentially a large rectangular garden court, approximately 48 meters long, with a narrow reflective pool or canal running lengthwise down the middle. Along this central water channel, at evenly spaced intervals, spouts jet graceful arches of water that cross from each side and meet in the air, forming a corridor of water jets. The canal is flanked by lush flower beds and aromatic shrubs. The plantings have been renewed over time, but traditionally included roses, jasmine, orange trees, myrtle, and lilies, providing color and fragrance. On either side of the Patio de la Acequia are arcaded porticos leading into the palace pavilions. The northern pavilion has a lovely portico of 5 arches, decorated with fine stucco carvings and epigraphs, leading into a hall with a mirador viewpoint overlooking the Alhambra across the valley. The southern pavilion was the main residential block where the Sultan's family would stay. It has been heavily altered over centuries, including a significant rebuild in the 16th century. The essence of the patio, however, remains pure: water, greenery, and architecture in harmony. The gentle splash of the fountain jets and the still sheet of water in the pool create a microclimate of coolness and a continuous, soothing sound, truly a meditative soundscape. On hot afternoons, one can imagine the Nasrid king sitting in the shade of the portico, dipping his fingers in the channel's cool water and reciting poetry or listening to music, at peace away from the city's cares. A modern commentator wrote that despite the crowds of tourists nowadays, the dancing waters do drown out the sounds of the clattering humans. I became more impressed and maybe entranced during my visit, attesting to the enduring calming power of this water garden. Beyond the court of the canal, the Generalife features other garden areas. One is the so-called Patio de la Sultana, or Courtyard of the Cypress, Patio del Cipre de la Sultana. This is a smaller garden where an enormous ancient cypress tree stands. Local lore claims this was the tree under which a sultan's wife met her lover in secret, a romantic yet tragic tale in Alhambra legend. The patio today has pools and hedges, but much of its current form dates from later landscape modifications. The North Arcade, for instance, was built in the 1580s. Still, the cypress is genuine and likely centuries old, adding a living link to the Nasrid era. Further upslope, one reaches the upper gardens of the Generalife, arranged in terraces. Perhaps the most enchanting feature here is the Escalera del Agua, the water stairway. This unique staircase climbs a steep slope under a cooling bower of laurel trees. What makes it magical is that water flows down alongside the stair. The brick parapets on either side have ceramic channels, inverted half pipes, through which water from the acequia reel runs merrily alongside you as you ascend. In Nasrid days, 3 small landing fountains, fed by lion-headed spouts, refreshed climbers at intervals. The soothing sound of running water, the ability to trail one's hand in the cool stream while walking up, and the green shade overhead combine to delight the senses. This stairway, though modified over time, is an example of medieval landscape engineering at its most inventive. It shows how function and pleasure merged. It was a practical route to upper terraces, an irrigation channel, and a refreshing retreat all at once. In modern times, the Escalera del Agua still carries water along its handrails, giving visitors a tangible connection to the hydraulic system that has been in continuous use for 700 plus years. Throughout the Alhambra and Generalife, water is much more than an amenity. It is a central artistic element. The Nasrids understood water's reflective qualities, its sound, its ability to animate architecture by adding movement and coolness. In the Court of the Myrtles, the still pool serves as a gigantic mirror, doubling the beauty of the arcade and sky. In the Court of the Lions, the 4 rills of water not only nourish the garden when it had plants, but also emphasize the geometric order of the space and lead the eye to the fountain. In the Hall of Ambassadors, an elaborate system allowed perfumed water to flow through channels in the floor, perhaps to cool the room and subtly scent gatherings. Some historians believe carved channels existed for this purpose. The bathhouses in the Alhambra, like the Bath of Comares, have star-shaped skylights to allow shafts of light to reflect in steam rising from hot water pools, creating an almost mystical bathing atmosphere. Water truly shaped the experience of being in these palaces. A modern water specialist writer, Eric Herman, observed, "The delicate balance between water and architecture in the Alhambra's courtyards evokes a sense of paradise, a common theme in Islamic garden design. Sound is part of that design. The lion fountain's gentle splash, the myrtle court's reflective silence punctuated by the call of birds, the acequia's bubbling flow, each is carefully calibrated. In the Generalife, as one moves away from the palace into orchards, you still hear water trickling along irrigation ditches that feed plots of vegetables and fruit trees, just as in Nasrid times the estate produced produce and flowers for the royal household. The planting design also held symbolism and practical value. Gardens were planted with cypress, orange, lemon, pomegranate, myrtle, rose, jasmine, and other aromatic or fruit-bearing species. Many of these have direct symbolic links. Cypress represents eternity, often planted in Islamic cemeteries and gardens. Fruit trees like pomegranates and oranges signify fertility and abundance. The pomegranate is actually the symbol of Granada city itself. Myrtle stands for love and was sacred to Venus, perhaps an adopted symbol in the context of a pleasure garden. The combination of these with flowing water created the sensual reward of shade, scent, taste, and sound. A 14th century visitor would have seen fish gliding in the pools, heard the splash of fountains and the rustle of leaves, smelled orange blossoms and rose attar, and felt the cool marble underfoot, a full-body experience of bliss. In a famous Arabic inscription at the Generalife, the garden is described as dispensing the delights of the senses 5, sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, color for the eyes, music of water for the ears, perfume for the nose, fruit for taste, and the texture of foliage and flowing water for touch. This multi-sensory design was intentional, aligning with the Islamic ideal of Jannah, the paradise where the faithful are promised all manner of delights. The Generalife and Alhambra Gardens have of course changed with time. The current layout of the Generalife's lower gardens, for instance, was largely redesigned in the early 20th century to incorporate new flower beds and structures in a neo-Renaissance style, notably by architect Leopoldo Torres Balbas as well, who tried to maintain an Andalusian character. Some purists may regret the introduction of certain modern elements or non-historic plants for aesthetics or maintenance reasons, for example, seasonal flowers for tourist appeal. Yet even with these evolutions, the fundamental impression remains one of timeless tranquility. In winter, when the deciduous trees have lost their leaves, one can more clearly see the original layout and structures, as one historian noted, and the evergreen myrtles and geometric designs become starkly apparent. In summer, conversely, the full foliage provides deep shade, and the gardens come alive with blooms and birds. Nightingales famously sing in the Alhambra's woods, adding to the auditory ambiance. The Alameda, great grove, of the Alhambra outside the walls, planted in part by the Duke of Wellington in the 19th century with tall elms, is perhaps a later addition, but it contributes to the sense that the Alhambra is hidden in a forest, removed from the ordinary world. In summary, the Alhambra and Generalife Gardens are masterpieces of landscape architecture, every bit as significant as the palaces they accompany. They demonstrate how the Nasrid designers achieved a paradise on earth theme in tangible form. The four rivers of paradise are abstracted into rills and pools. The abundance of Eden is suggested by fruit trees and perpetual blooms. The promise of heavenly bliss is echoed in the very earthly pleasures of cool water and sweet fragrances. At night, the effect could be especially enchanting. Historical records mention how oil lamps or candles placed around pools and in lanterns would reflect off the water and gild the leaves, while the stars above glittered through the open courts. We can imagine a summer night in the Generalife, the royal family seated outdoors, a faint breeze carrying the scent of jasmine, the silhouette of the Alhambra's towers visible against the starlight across the valley, and the gentle splash of fountains composing a lullaby. In the stillness, one might understand why the Amirs called this estate Jannat al-Arif, not merely a garden of an architect, but truly a garden of the wise, a place to retreat from worldly worries and attune oneself to the rhythms of nature and the divine. With the stage set by architecture and gardens, let us now explore how people lived in and experienced these spaces, the daily life, culture, and art that animated the Alhambra during its years as a royal court. Courtly life in the Alhambra, a day in paradise. Life within the Alhambra in the 14th and 15th centuries must have felt like life inside a living work of art. The palaces were not museums, they were homes and seats of government. Ministers came and went, soldiers kept watch on the towers, craftsmen toiled in workshops, and the Sultan and his family carried on their daily routines against the sumptuous backdrop we have described. What was it like to live in this pearl among emeralds? Let us imagine the gentle cadence of a day in the Alhambra at its height, informed by the records and remnants of its material culture. At the break of dawn, a clear light would start to illumine the snow-capped peaks of the Sierra Nevada. The muezzin of the Alhambra's Friday Mosque, situated near what is now the Church of Santa Maria, just off the Court of the Myrtles, would call out the adhan, the call to prayer, his voice echoing over the ramparts and down to the sleeping city of Granada below. The inhabitants of the Alhambra, courtiers, guards, servants, and the royal family, would rise to perform the Fajr, dawn prayer. The Sultan himself, as a Muslim ruler, was expected to set an example of piety. One can picture him in a small private prayer hall or the mosque, kneeling on ornate carpets with the mihrab lamp casting flickers on the stucco, reciting Quranic verses as the first rays of sun filter through lattice windows. The silence of dawn, broken only by the murmured prayers and the occasional cooing of doves, would soon give way to the stir of daytime activity. After prayers, the palaces began to bustle gently. In the Mexuar, officials of the Chancery, the Diwan, assembled to review petitions and prepare for the day's audiences. The vizier and secretaries unrolled scrolls or opened ledgers, their low voices discussing matters of state. Courtiers came to wait in the antesala, anteroom, of the Mexuar to seek redress of grievances or present requests, a sort of morning council or court session. The Sultan might appear, likely in the Mexuar Hall or the porch of the Golden Room, a vestibule between Mexuar and Comares Palace, where he could address matters of justice. The architecture of these spaces actually facilitated audience etiquette. For example, the Sultan could listen from behind a lattice screen, the balcony of the Mexuar, so that his presence didn't overly intimidate petitioners, or he could appear on a slightly elevated platform framed by an arch, emphasizing his role as dispenser of justice under God's authority. The motto, "Only God is," Victor emblazoned above, reminded all that the Sultan's power was not absolute. Sunlight would by now be flooding the courtyards. In the Mexuar courtyard, a fountain tinkled softly, perhaps used for ritual ablutions by those about to enter the hall. Later in the morning, official audiences or diplomatic meetings might occur in the more formal spaces. If an ambassador from Castile, or a merchant envoy from Genoa, or a marinid prince from Morocco were visiting, they would be received in the splendid Hall of Ambassadors in the Comares Tower. Imagine the scene. The hall has been prepared with its luxurious furnishings. Although today the Alhambra's rooms are bare, in Nasrid times they were richly appointed. Fine carpets from the workshops of Almeria or the Orient would have been spread across the marble floors. Against the walls, thick cushions and brocade-covered divans provided seating. The custom was to sit on low cushions, not chairs, hence the low windows and niche seats. The walls may have been further adorned with tapestries or textiles, perhaps embroidered hangings or gilded leather screens, to add warmth and reduce echoes. Niches in the walls, called tecas, held beautiful ceramic vases or lusterware jars filled with cool water or perfumed liquids. Indeed, the Alhambra was famous for its enormous ceramic vases, about 4 feet tall, with blue, white, and gold designs, used as decorative pieces in corners of large rooms. A few of these Alhambra vases survive in museums, like the vase of the gazelles, showcasing the high artistry of Nasrid pottery. In the Hall of Ambassadors, the Sultan would seat himself on a slightly raised dais by the central window, perhaps with a carved wooden throne or chair behind him, the only piece of furniture resembling a chair reserved for the ruler. The ambassador would be let in through the cortina, curtain, covering the doorway, accompanied by viziers. They would approach the sultan bowing and present gifts or letters. All the while, the ambassador's eyes would inevitably drift upward to the stunning celestial ceiling with its gilded stars, and around at the encircling calligraphic frieze that might even include words of welcome or verses extolling the palace's magnificence. The impression was carefully calibrated to overawe the power of aesthetic diplomacy. Yet golden sunlight coming through the stained glass star windows at the top of the hall would lend a warmth and natural grace to the encounter, preventing it from being merely intimidating. We know historically that one such meeting did occur in this hall in 1492 when Boabdil met with Spanish officials to negotiate surrender terms, illustrating that the Hall of Ambassadors remained the stage for weighty events until the end of Muslim rule. While these formalities took place, the life of the court went on elsewhere in the palace city. In the inner courtyards, such as the Court of the Lions, the more private daily life unfolded. Women of the royal family, the Sultan's mother, often a powerful figure, his wives, daughters, and their attendants spent much of their time in the harem quarters that were adjacent to the Court of Lions. The Hall of the Two Sisters and its surrounding chambers are thought to have been part of the royal harem or family apartments. Here, in mid-morning, one might find the Sultan's children having lessons with tutors, boys learning to recite the Quran or practice calligraphy on wooden tablets, girls perhaps learning embroidery or music. The sounds of giggles or the plucking of an oud, a lute-like instrument, might drift through a grilled window. The ladies of the court might stroll in the Lindaraja garden, enjoying the shade and perfume, discussing poetry or court news. They would be dressed in fine silks, lightly embroidered with gold thread, garments that we only get hints of from descriptions, as textiles rarely survive. Some accounts speak of kabas, kaftan-like gowns, and hijabs or head veils delicately woven. Servants would bring refreshment, perhaps cool sherbets flavored with pomegranate or citrus on a hot day, served in cups of polished brass or glazed ceramic. The Generalife was often used by the court women as well. Being more secluded, it was an ideal place for the harem to spend summers. They could relax by the long canal in the patio, dipping their fingers in the water or playing with the sprays that jet upwards, free from the prying eyes of the world. Back in the palace, as noon approached, the call to dur, midday prayer, would be heard. After prayer, the main meal of the day might be served. The royal kitchen was likely located in the Medina area, or a service wing. Some smaller structures near the Partal or further south are believed to have included kitchens. Platters of savory dishes would be prepared: spiced lamb with dried fruits, couscous, rice with herbs, fresh bread from the palace bakery, and sweets like honey-drenched pastries and cooling watermelon in summer, reflecting the sophisticated Andalusia cuisine that combined Arabic, Berber, and Iberian ingredients. In the palace halls, low tables or dining cloths, sufra, would be set on the floor, and the Sultan and his family and close courtiers would eat in traditional fashion, seated on cushions. We have records that Nasrid emirs relished local specialties, such as trout from the mountain streams, and the produce of the Generalife orchards, figs, pomegranates, grapes, etc. Water from the Alhambra's system, likely stored in cool clay jars, and fruit syrups would accompany the meal. There was also a tradition of drinking infusions, perhaps mint or Artemisia tea, as well as the controversial enjoyment of wine. Though alcohol is forbidden in Islam, some Nasrid kings did indulge in wine, as evidenced by poetry and the existence of a wine gate in the Alhambra, but presumably discreetly within private settings. After lunch, during the hottest part of the day, a siesta was customary. The thick walls of the Alhambra kept the interiors cool, but additionally, many rooms had water channels or fountains to freshen the air. In the Hall of the Two Sisters, for example, a fountain with a small jet stands at the center of the floor, historically fed by the same system as the Court of Lions fountain. The gentle burble of water and the dimmed light of closed shutters would lull everyone into a restful pause. The Sultan might retire to a quiet mirador, perhaps the mirador of Lindaraja or the mirador of Daraksa, to recline on cushions, gaze at the courtyard garden through lattice screens, and doze off to the sound of birds. As afternoon progressed and the shadows lengthened, activity resumed. Artisans within the Alhambra's walls might be at work. Indeed, the Alhambra was like a small city containing various trades. One could find ceramic workshops where potters painted the distinctive blue and white tiles and lusterware, firing them in kilns. There was a pottery quarter in the Medina. There were metal workers forging door locks, nails, and bronze lamps. In fact, a magnificent bronze chandelier lamp from the Alhambra's mosque survives, dated 1305, which is covered in delicate openwork inscriptions and patterns. It likely hung from the mosque ceiling, casting patterned light. Such craftsmen would have been on site to maintain and create the palace's treasures. Weavers and embroiderers might also work in the palace to produce curtains, saddlecloths, and garments for the court. The presence of a tannery within the Alhambra implies leather goods, bookbindings, cushions, shoes, harnesses were crafted there as well. The air in some corner of the Medina might carry the tang of cured leather or the smoke of a kiln, tempered by the breezes carrying jasmine from the gardens. The Alhambra's population included not just nobility, but also servants, slaves, and soldiers with their families. At its height, several thousand people might have lived inside the fortress city. Children would play in the smaller courtyards or corridors, perhaps imitating the swordplay of the royal guards. Women might visit the public bath, hammam, that was within the Alhambra to socialize and cleanse. One such hammam still partially exists near the Partal, with its typical starry ventilation holes in the ceiling. Meanwhile, guards patrolled the walls and towers. One can imagine a watchman atop the Torre de la Vela in the golden late afternoon, ringing a bell or sounding a horn to signal the hour or any news from the road approaching Granada. As the sun dipped lower, the court's focus often turned toward more leisurely arts. The Nasrid court was known for its love of poetry, music, and learning. Scholars might gather in a quiet arcaded patio to debate theology or philosophy. The Alhambra likely had a library with precious manuscripts. Indeed, it's recorded that the Nasrid sultans patronized literature and housed books on astronomy, medicine, law, and poetry. The Water Shapes article notes that the Alhambra's libraries housed numerous manuscripts, facilitating exchange of knowledge between the Islamic world and Europe. Perhaps some of these works were read or taught in the palace, contributing to the education of the young princes. We know for certain that at least two of the sultans, Yusuf I and Muhammad V, were great patrons of the literary arts, commissioning poems and histories. So in the evenings, it would be typical for the royal family and courtiers to enjoy musical performances and poetry recitals. These might take place in the hall of the Abencerrages, which some historians believe was used as a music room due to its superb acoustics under the Muqarnas dome. Lute players, flautists, and percussionists, on dome-beck drums perhaps, would sit on carpets and their melodies would rise, resonating in the honeycombed vault. Courtiers skilled in verse, often the viziers themselves, recited poems comparing the palace to paradise, or praising the beauty of a rose in the Generalife, or the virtue of the sultan. The very walls around them carried verses that could join the chorus. One could almost read along the stucco inscriptions as if they were lyrics to the music. No conqueror but God. Joy enters the garden. Through these halls the breezes blow, carrying the scent of flowers. Such lines exist on the palace walls, forming a poetic backdrop to daily life. The interplay of live poetry and inscribed poetry might blur, creating an atmosphere steeped in refined expression. As twilight fell, the temperature would cool and the court might move outdoors to enjoy the evening air. The Alhambra's courtyards at dusk are particularly enchanting. The sky turns deep blue, and as stars appear, the pools reflect the emerging moon. Servants would light oil lamps in niches and on stands. In Nasrid times, these lamps were beautifully crafted of brass or bronze, often openwork so that they cast patterned shadows, much like the intricate lamp from the mosque. Walking through the Court of the Myrtles, one would see the arches illuminated by flickering light, the water mirror now reflecting tiny points of lamplight and stars, blending them. The royals might take this time to ascend to the Generalife if they were not already there, for an after-dinner respite. The Generalife's high position offers a panorama of the Alhambra against the skyline of the city. One famous tradition is that the Sultan would withdraw to the Generalife to escape the formalities and intrigues of the main palace. On a summer night, perhaps he sat in the portico of the Generalife with a favored few, listening to the chorus of nightingales singing in the grove. The Alhambra's woods are known for their nightingales even today. The water jets in the patio of the Acequia would continue their dance, now catching the moonlight. Lanterns might be hung in the arcades, but parts of the garden would lie in shadow, perfumed by night-blooming jasmine and lady of the night blossoms. It was in such moments that the Nasrid ruler could reflect on the fate of his lineage and the eternal glory of God under the celestial dome of stars. One can imagine a scene described by a later poet, the Sultan gazing at the constellations, their light reflected in the still pools, as a court astronomer points out the planet Venus hanging just above the Alhambra's towers. During many evenings, the Alhambra would host entertainments. These could include munshidin, singers of classical poems or even mystical Sufi songs, dancers performing perhaps the graceful racks of Andalusia tradition, or even shadow plays, since puppetry and storytelling were popular across the Islamic world. Certainly, stories from folklore might be told in informal settings, the ancestors of the tales that Washington Irving later collected as Alhambra legends. There was, for instance, the tale of the enchanted soldier or the hidden treasure of the Alhambra, which the people of Granada whispered about, and that perhaps even courtiers found amusing to recount on a spooky night. The palace by night, with its maze of rooms and whispering corridors, could inspire ghost stories even then. As night deepened, the palaces would gradually fall silent. The guards on the walls were still vigilant. One could hear their footsteps echo on the stone ramparts, and perhaps the clink of their mail or swords. Families retreated to their chambers. Large wooden doors carved with arabesque patterns were bolted. Many original carved doors have survived or been reconstructed, revealing the fine carpentry of the Nasrid period. In sleeping quarters, mattresses stuffed with wool or cotton lay atop rugs, and niches in the wall held small oil lamps or candles that could be snuffed easily. The elite might sleep under light silk covers in summer, or heavier brocade quilts in winter. Winters in Granada can be cold, and though the Alhambra's fireplaces are few, braziers of coals would be used to provide warmth in living areas. In the stillness of the early morning hours, one imagines the fountains and canals still flowing. They never cease. The continuous gentle gurgle of water was essentially the white noise of the Alhambra, a constant lullaby that could ease one's dreams. Life in the Alhambra was not always idyllic. There were certainly moments of stress, fear, especially as the Reconquista battles encroached, and tragedy, intrigues that led to assassinations, like some suggest happened to certain Nasrid princes. Yet the environment itself was so harmoniously constructed that it offered a sense of order and peace, even in turbulent times. Diplomats from Christian lands often wrote with wonder at the sophistication of life at the Moorish court, noting the cleanliness due to frequent bathing, the cultivated manners, and the artistic richness. A visitor in the 14th century would have found the Alhambra to be a place where scholarship and art flourished alongside governance. For instance, Sultan Yusuf I founded a madrasa university in Granada City and patronized scholars like Ibn al-Khatib, reflecting the intellectual climate that extended to palace life. Discussions of astronomy may have taken place under that starry Komar's ceiling. Debates on jurisprudence or philosophy could have occurred in an intimate iwan off a courtyard. In essence, daily life in the Alhambra was a blend of formal ceremony, administrative routine, domestic tranquility, and refined leisure. It was regulated by the rhythms of religion, the 5 daily prayers structuring time, by the needs of state, and by the changing seasons which would move the court between palaces and gardens. But whether in a grand hall or a secluded garden, those who lived in the Alhambra were constantly surrounded by beauty and symbolism. Every column, every inscription, every layout of water channels underfoot subtly reinforced their cultural values and provided psychological comfort. It is said that architecture can influence the mood of its inhabitants. The Nasrids understood this well. Within those ornate halls, one would feel a sense of elevation and contentment, as if residing in a worldly preview of paradise. The art and symbolism of the Alhambra's decoration. The Alhambra is often called a palace of symbols. Almost every decorative element in its halls carries meaning beyond the merely beautiful. The artisans of Granada wove into the Alhambra's fabric a rich tapestry of Islamic art motifs, geometric patterns, flowing arabesques, and elegant calligraphy, which together create a visual language of faith, power, and knowledge. To wander through its rooms is to read a book written in plaster and tile. In this section, we will decipher some of that symbolic language and explore what the Alhambra's art tells us about the worldview of its creators. First and foremost, the Alhambra's decoration is a testament to the Islamic belief in the unity of God and the order of creation. Unlike many European palaces of the same era, you will find no figurative statues of rulers or painted portraits here. In adherence to Islamic artistic norms, the ornamentation avoids human or animal depictions, with the notable exception of the lion sculptures which we will discuss. Instead, the walls and arches bloom with geometric designs and vegetal motifs. These are not random patterns. They often reflect mathematical principles and natural forms in stylized abstraction. The repetition and complexity of the geometric patterns, stars, polygons, interlaced strapwork, suggests the infinite and the orderly nature of the cosmos, ideas closely tied to Islamic theology. For instance, many wall tiles feature giri, or lasseria patterns, which are created by arranging simple polygons into elaborate, non-repeating designs. Such patterns have a kind of transcendental quality. They can extend theoretically without end, implying the infinite nature of Allah's creation. The Nasrid artisans mastered this art, and the Alhambra showcases some of the most sophisticated geometric tiling seen in the medieval world. It is known that they even employed giri tiles as templates, using principles of geometry that modern mathematicians have studied with admiration. To the viewer, these patterns are mesmerizing and induce a meditative state. One can get lost following the lines as they weave over surfaces, much as one's mind might wander in contemplation of the infinite. Intertwined with the geometry are the arabesque and floral motifs. Stylized leaves, vines, and petals carve their way through the stucco panels. They often form scrolling patterns known as atarik, where acanthus leaves, pine cones, lotus blossoms, or palm fronds can be discerned amid the curls. These evoke the natural worlds, the garden in abstract. In a palace that is itself a representation of paradise, the walls echo the theme by showing ever-blooming, symmetrical vegetation that never withers, since it's in stone or plaster. The effect of these vegetal designs, often highlighted with color originally, would have been to soften the architecture and make interior spaces feel almost like open-air bowers. Some arabesques hide symbolic meaning. For example, the pine cone motif found in certain capitals might reference baraka, blessing, as pine cones were a sign of fertility. But generally, the continuous scroll of the arabesque communicates harmony and growth, reflecting an underlying belief in the beneficence of creation. Perhaps the most direct symbolic content comes from the Arabic calligraphy that adorns so many walls. The Alhambra is famous for its inscriptions. There are hundreds of passages of poetry and Quranic text throughout the palaces, all executed in graceful cursive or Kufic script. These serve both decorative and didactic functions. A common inscription, as noted earlier, is the Nasrid dynasty's motto, Wa la Ghalib ilallah. There is no victor/conqueror except God. This phrase appears dozens of times, worked into friezes and cornices, almost like a chant encircling the rooms. Politically, it was a humble yet pointed statement. The Nasrid sultans, despite their earthly power, acknowledged that ultimate victory lies with the divine. Considering that the dynasty had to rely on clever diplomacy and often suffered defeats, it was perhaps also a constant prayer and reminder of hope in God's help. Other inscriptions include Quranic verses, especially those that evoke themes of paradise, praise God's unity, or seek divine protection. For instance, in the Hall of the Two Sisters, one finds verses from the chapter of the Dominion, Surah al-Mulk, about the sovereignty of God who created the seven heavens one above another, quite apt under that seven-layered Muqarnas dome, which itself symbolizes heaven. In the Palace of the Lions, lines of poetry by Ibn Zamrak describe the beauty of the place and subtly flatter the Sultan. On a wall, it might extol how the palace has no equal in all the world, or how its fountains put the clouds to shame. By reading these inscriptions, and many were painted in bright hues for legibility, inhabitants and visitors engaged with the space intellectually and spiritually. They were literally surrounded by literature. The walls spoke, encouraging reflection on virtues, on the glory of the dynasty, on the omnipresence of God. This interplay of text and architecture exemplifies the concept of the Alhambra as a written palace or a poetic space. The lines are so artfully integrated into the geometry and foliage that at times you only notice them when the light rakes at a certain angle and the cursive letters throw shadows. Then one realizes the walls are talking. Enter and fear not. May God be with you is inscribed above a doorway, offering comfort. Elsewhere, one reads, rejoice in good fortune, because Allah helps you. The environment becomes an active participant in court life, reinforcing ideology and faith gently but continuously. Another significant symbol system in the Alhambra is the use of light and space. The architects designed the buildings to harness natural light in symbolic ways. The Hall of Ambassadors, for example, has its starry ceiling brighter in the center and dark towards the edges, as if to create an image of the heavenly vault, a microcosm of the universe over the throne. In the Court of Myrtles, the open sky above and the reflective pool below together suggest the concept of, as above, so below, a unity of the celestial and terrestrial. In the Court of Lions, the four streams of water meeting at the fountain represent the four rivers of paradise, described in Islamic tradition, water, milk, honey, and wine flowing in Jannah. The division of the courtyard into four garden plots around that cross of water channels is the classic Persian Chaharbagh plan, explicitly echoing Quranic descriptions of the Garden of Heaven beneath which rivers flow. Thus the very layout is symbolic of divine promise. The lion fountain itself carries layered symbolism. Beyond Solomon's throne mentioned earlier, lions are often symbols of courage and royalty. In an Islamic context, they can also allude to the Lion of God, a title of Ali, the Prophet's cousin. However, installing full sculpted animals was unusual in a Muslim palace, suggesting a deliberate reference to pre-Islamic regal iconography, possibly the Nasrids nodding to the legacy of earlier Spanish civilizations or to the idea of kingship transcending religious bounds. It might also have been simply that they inherited or commissioned the fountain inspired by legends of grandeur, Solomon's seat. In any case, by animating these lions with water, something Solomon's legend also describes, the fountain symbolizes the just ruler who brings life-giving water to his domain and whose power is supported by strength, the lions, and mercy, the flowing water. Remarkably, the poem on the basin has the lions speaking as if alive, boasting of their power, yet marveling that water has been made to seem still. The jets arc so smoothly it looks frozen. This interplay of art and nature was intended to astonish. It's art that confounds nature, solid marble animals spouting real water, and nature that ornaments art, real water creating patterns around carved stone. The message could be read as under the Nasrids, human craft and the natural world work together in perfect harmony, a sign of a divinely favored rule. Colors too had meaning. Although faded, the primary colors used were blue, red, and gold. Blue, drawn from lapis or cobalt, symbolized the sky, the infinite, and in an Islamic context, often the divine realm or protection. Many mosques use blue abundantly. Red, from iron oxide ochres, symbolized earth or life force, also royalty and power. Gold, obvious in its suggestion of the sun, wealth, and divine light, covered many of the inscriptions and details to highlight them. The combination of these colors created a rich tapestry signifying a cosmic order. Gold script, divine word, on blue ground, heaven, with red and green accents, earthly flora. Even architectural elements carry symbolic weight. The Muqarnas stalactite vaults, besides being an aesthetic tour de force of mathematics and plasterwork, also have been interpreted symbolically. Some see in them a representation of the cave, an important symbol in Islamic mysticism and where the prophet received revelations, or of the heavens with layer upon layer of angelic ranks. Standing under a Muqarnas dome, one indeed feels a sense of wonder. The form breaks solid architecture into a cloud of tiny cells where light dances. In the Hall of Two Sisters, the Muqarnas dome contains over 5,000 tiny cells. It's easy to imagine that to a devout onlooker, these could symbolize the multitude of souls or the stars of the firmament. It creates a feeling of ascension. The eye is drawn upward and lost in the complexity, perhaps to encourage contemplation of the divine complexity above. The Alhambra's art also subtly encodes the political ideology of the Nasrids. The choice of Quranic verses is telling. Often they selected passages that liken victories to divine favor or that assure the faithful of God's support. Considering Granada's precarious position, these were not idle decorations, but affirmations to bolster morale and legitimacy. The heavy use of the motto, "No victor but God," also served to legitimize the Nasrids. Unlike the boastful Christian kings who inscribed their own names in big letters on castles, the Nasrid sultans presented themselves as humble vassals of God, thereby spiritually elevating themselves in the eyes of their subjects. For a just Islamic ruler is one who submits to God. At the same time, the sheer magnificence of the art was a symbol of the dynasty's sophistication and rightful place. This was a court that could attract the best artisans, command the sciences of geometry and hydrology, produced transcendent poetry, a sign that it was a worthy successor to the great courts of Damascus, Baghdad, and Cordoba. It was a beacon of Islamic culture in a time and place where that culture was under existential threat, and perhaps the Nasrids knew it. So they poured into the Alhambra everything they could of Islamic Andalusian heritage, making it a resplendent microcosm of Al-Andalus at its zenith. Finally, the experience of the art is itself symbolic. The Alhambra was designed to be perceived sequentially in a choreography of views and sensations. You don't see everything at once. Instead, you move through a series of spaces that reveal themselves gradually, a dark passage suddenly opening into a bright courtyard with a gleaming fountain, or a low, plain door leading into a high, lavish hall. This is symbolic of the journey to enlightenment, or to paradise. One moves from darkness to light, from constriction to spaciousness, from simplicity to overwhelming beauty. It can be seen as analogous to the Sufi path of spiritual realization. The initiate leaves the ordinary world, the plain fortress exterior, and steps into the mystical garden of inner truths, the intricate, illuminated interior. Whether the Nasrids intended this mystical interpretation or not, the spatial progression certainly heightens the impact of the art and architecture, and in doing so, impresses symbolic lessons, patience, wonder, and reward. In summary, the Alhambra's art is not merely ornament for ornament's sake. It is a layered narrative that communicates key themes: the supremacy of God, the paradise-like nature of a just kingdom, the learning and faith of the Nasrid court, and the harmony between human artifice and divine creation. That one building can embody all this and do so with such grace is part of why the Alhambra has captivated minds for centuries. As one walks its corridors and reads its walls, one is communing with the very spirit of Andalusian Islam. Washington Irving perhaps said it best: "The Alhambra by moonlight, its inscriptions glimmering, seemed to him like the writing on the walls of enchantment, as if the palace itself whispered the secrets of a lost world." From Moorish palace to Christian monument, the Alhambra, after 1492. The conquest of Granada in 1492 was a watershed not only in political history, but also in the life of the Alhambra. We have already recounted how the last sultan, Boabdil, departed sorrowfully and the Catholic monarchs took possession. In this section, we focus on how the Alhambra transitioned during the Reconquista and after, and how its role and appearance changed under Christian rule. The story is one of adaptation, partial neglect, and rediscovery, spanning from the 16th century to the present, a continuation of the monument's biography that shaped it into the iconic site we know today. When Ferdinand and Isabella entered the Alhambra in January 1492, they were awed by its beauty. For a short while, the palace became one of their royal residences. The unique atmosphere of the Alhambra struck them, and they initially maintained it with care. The capitulation agreements, treaty of surrender, guaranteed the protection of Moorish buildings, so the new rulers had a policy to respect the architecture, at least early on. They designated a governor of the Alhambra, the first being Don Inigo Lopez de Mendoza, Count of Tendilla, who took up residence there and is credited by historians with helping preserve the palaces through the tumultuous years that followed. It was under his watch that the Alhambra's mosque was converted to a church without destroying the building immediately, and he reportedly prevented vandalism or misuse of the palaces by newly arrived Christian settlers. The Catholic monarchs conducted some important ceremonies there. For instance, it's often noted that they held a Mass of Thanksgiving in the Alhambra's Grand Hall to celebrate the conquest of Granada. Significantly, in those first years, the Alhambra became the backdrop for the dawn of Spain's imperial era. As mentioned, it was here that Columbus received the royal endorsement that launched his voyage to the New World. In a sense, the palace witnessed the handover from one epoch to another. After a few years, however, the primary royal court moved elsewhere, and the Alhambra's status diminished from a principal seat to more of a provincial stronghold and noble residence. The Habsburg monarchs, like Charles V and Philip II, visited Granada infrequently. The Alhambra still held symbolic allure. For example, when Charles V married Isabella of Portugal in 1526, they spent part of their honeymoon in the Alhambra, charmed by its exotic atmosphere, and it was that visit which inspired Charles's decision to build a new palace there. Under the Christian regime, inevitably, some parts of the Alhambra were repurposed or altered. The former Great Mosque of the Alhambra, situated near today's Palace of Charles V, was one of the first changes. It was consecrated as a Catholic church dedicated to Saint Mary, Santa Maria de la Alhambra. Later, in 1581, that old mosque building was demolished and a Renaissance-style church was erected on its foundations. That church still stands, a relatively simple structure compared to the palaces, but its presence means that daily Catholic worship replaced the 5 daily Muslim prayers within the Alhambra walls. In doing so, it signaled the spiritual transformation of the complex in line with the new ruler's faith. Monastic life also made an entry. In 1494, the Catholic monarchs established a Franciscan monastery in one of the Nasrid palaces. The building now known as the Palacio del Portal Alto was given to the Franciscans. This monastery later became the site where the royal tombs were first kept until the cathedral in the city was ready. Queen Isabella was initially interred in the Alhambra's chapel for a short time. The monastery's presence also meant further modification of grounds. Monastic cloisters, chapels, and quarters were inserted. Centuries later, that monastery was secularized and converted to what is now the Parador de Granada, a state-run historic hotel, but the building still retains elements of both Nasrid design and Spanish Renaissance overlay. The Palace of Charles V, begun in 1526, was the most conspicuous intervention. Architecturally, it's a massive square edifice in polished stone, local limestone, 2 stories high, with a unique circular courtyard in the center. A fine example of high Renaissance architecture influenced by Bramante and Michelangelo's styles. To make room for this palace, some Nasrid structures were indeed sacrificed, notably parts of the original Nasrid Meksuar and perhaps a section of the adjacent palace of Yusuf III were torn down. One can imagine the clash of aesthetics, ornate arabesques and courtyards giving way to the severe columns and rusticated stone of a plateresque facade. Charles V's palace physically intrudes into the Moorish ensemble, though interestingly it was never finished with the intended slate dome. For many years, it remained roofless, an empty shell used occasionally for events or as barracks. Locals in later eras disliked it, viewing it as an insensitive blemish on the Alhambra's face. 19th century travelers often commented regretfully on this intrusive palace. Yet ironically, it is now part of the Alhambra experience and hosts the Alhambra Museum. It also tells a story, the insertion of a Renaissance palace symbolized the triumph of the new order and the attempt to Europeanize or Christianize the site. On the positive side, Charles V's admiration for the Alhambra led him to protect it legally to some extent. He issued decrees forbidding people from defacing or altering the older palaces, except his project. He essentially wanted to add his mark, not destroy the Nasrid legacy, a form of cultural appropriation, perhaps, but with a preservationist silver lining. The fact that he left the Court of Lions intact, and even had his builders incorporate an entry so that one could pass from his palace directly into the Court of Myrtles, shows he intended a degree of integration between old and new, and indeed valued the Moorish artistry. In the late 16th and 17th centuries, the Alhambra's fortunes waned. After the Morisco, Muslim converts, rebellion of 1568, and their subsequent expulsion, 1609, Granada lost a significant portion of its population and economic vitality. The Alhambra, no longer central to power, slowly became a backwater citadel. The Spanish military used parts of it as a fortress. Additional fortifications were built, for example, gunpowder stores and new bastions. The beautiful Hall of Ambassadors was converted at one point into a dungeon for Christian prisoners of war during the 18th century War of Spanish Succession, according to some accounts, which speaks to the degradation of purpose. The ornate rooms were occasionally partitioned or plastered over to suit practical uses. For instance, the mexuar was partially turned into a chapel with the addition of a Baroque altar and altarpiece in the 1700s. Earthquakes, particularly in 1590 and 1755, caused structural damage. We have records that the Lion Fountain was knocked over by a tremor and had to be repaired. The Spanish Bourbon kings, far away in Madrid, did little for the Alhambra aside from stationing small garrisons there. The lowest point came during the Napoleonic occupation, 1808 to 1812. Napoleon's troops used the Alhambra as a military HQ and, as mentioned, packed certain towers with explosives when they had to retreat. They blew up 8 towers, including the beautiful Torre de la Cautiva and Torre de los Siete Suelos, 7 stories tower, destroying them or leaving them in ruins. They also severely damaged parts of the outer ramparts and the aforementioned Partal area. One whole Nasrid palace, the palace of the Abencerrages, that had been in ruinous state, was further obliterated by these blasts. Only sheer luck, or as legend has it, a quick-thinking Spanish soldier who disarmed remaining charges, saved the entire complex from being leveled. After the French left, the Alhambra sat partially in rubble and widely regarded as haunted or cursed. Locals were afraid to live there due to ghost stories of Moorish spirits and treasure guardians. It became the abode of vagrants, travelers, and small community of squatters. For example, several families took up residence in the Palace of the Lions, stringing laundry and lighting cooking fires beneath the arcades. The romantic traveler Washington Irving in 1828 describes befriending the local janitor, the fortress's uninvolved warden, and being able to stay in the empty rooms, hearing owls and imagining past sultans. He also speaks of gypsies and poor families still living in some of the courtyards, lending color to his tales with their songs and customs. Irving's work, Tales of the Alhambra, did much to spark interest in restoring the place, as we noted. Thus, the Reconquista transition can be summarized as a trajectory from venerated palace to neglected ruin, followed by the 19th century rediscovery and restoration movement already covered. The Spanish government eventually realized the Alhambra's value. By declaring it a national monument in 1870, Spain ensured state funds would be allocated. The subsequent careful restorations by experts like Contreras and Torres Balbas re-elevated the Alhambra to a place of pride, but this time not as a living royal palace, rather as a cultural and historical treasure for the nation and the world. It's important to note that during the 19th and early 20th centuries, attitudes shifted from seeing the Alhambra as merely a spoils of war curiosity to recognizing it as an integral part of Spanish heritage. The concept of Spanish Moorish style influenced architecture worldwide, like the Moorish revival buildings and follies in Europe and America. The Alhambra, once a symbol of the conquered other, Islamic Spain, became accepted as a symbol of Spain itself, representing a unique blend of East and West. Writers like Irving romanticized it as a place of mystery, and Spanish intellectuals started embracing it as a source of inspiration for Mudejar revival arts and national identity. The irony is rich. What was initially preserved by Christians under compulsion, treaty obligations, and aesthetic appreciation by a few, eventually came to be preserved by later Spaniards out of genuine pride and a sense of continuity with that part of their past. In contemporary times, after all these transitions, the Alhambra stands as a monument open to all, no longer a royal seat or military outpost, but a museum and symbol of cultural coexistence. The cross still stands on the Torre de la Vela, and the Church of Santa Maria still holds Mass, showing the enduring Christian layer. Yet every day the palaces teem with visitors from across the globe who marvel at the Islamic art, some learning perhaps for the first time of the glory of Al-Andalus. The site's interpretive signage and tours often emphasize the ingenuity of the Muslim architects and the poetry of the Nasrid court. In this way, the Alhambra today also serves as a bridge between civilizations, a platform to educate about Islamic heritage in Europe, and a testament to how history's conquerors eventually safeguarded what was beautiful in the conquered culture. The blending of styles, the Renaissance palace, the Baroque church, the Nasrid palaces, within one complex, physically narrates the story of Spain's layered identity. Through careful conservation, the essential character of the Alhambra as a medieval Islamic palace has been preserved and highlighted. For instance, the removal of that Baroque altar in the Mexuar in the 20th century was done to restore the room's Nasrid authenticity. Today's curators strive to keep any new additions reversible and distinguishable, following Torres Balbas's philosophy. The result is that the Alhambra feels very much like a Moorish palace still. The Christian era scars are either minimized or themselves historicized for interpretation. A visitor may walk through without strongly feeling the upheaval of 1492 at every turn. Rather, they experience continuity. Still, subtle signs remain. A small plaque in Latin here, a coat of arms of Charles V over a doorway. There, some later rajas, wrought iron grills on windows, and of course the bulk of the Charles V palace, which now houses a fine museum of Islamic art, as if reconciling its presence by making it the guardian of Nasrid artifacts. The Reconquista transition ultimately failed to erase the Alhambra. Instead, it added new chapters to its story. The site, once a trophy of conquest, has become a UNESCO World Heritage for all humanity. And in a poetic twist, the words of the Nasrid poets still adorn the walls, still legible and illuminated, while the alterations of their conquerors, except for structures like Charles's palace, often faded away. For example, the whitewash applied over inscriptions in some rooms has been carefully removed by restorers to reveal the Arabic beneath. It's almost as if the Alhambra had a life and resilience of its own. To conclude this section, the Alhambra's journey through and beyond the Reconquista is a story of preservation through adaptation. It survived because it was too beautiful to destroy, and because even those outside its original culture found themselves enchanted and compelled to respect it. That enchantment has continued to grow, making the Alhambra a symbol of the enduring legacy of Al-Andalus. As one stands in the Court of the Lions today, hearing Spanish, English, Arabic, Chinese, and a dozen other languages spoken by visitors, one can reflect that the palace built by Muslim kings, preserved by Christian kings, romanticized by foreign writers, and restored by modern experts now belongs to everyone. It is a monument to cross-cultural fertilization and to the idea that art can transcend the rise and fall of empires. Legacy and lasting influence of the Alhambra. Few monuments have cast a cultural shadow as long and captivating as the Alhambra. Over the centuries, this palace fortress has inspired countless artists, writers, architects, and even politicians. Its legacy is multifaceted. It is a source of national pride for Spain, a key reference in the study of Islamic art and architecture, a tourist magnet that shapes the economy of Granada, and a wellspring of artistic imagination far beyond Spain's borders. In this final section, we explore how the Alhambra's influence has endured and evolved, cementing its status as a world icon and a must-visit wonder, all while retaining the tranquil, meditative spirit that defines it. In Spain's national identity, after the Reconquista, there was initially a complex attitude towards Moorish heritage. But by the 19th and 20th centuries, Spaniards increasingly embraced the Alhambra as an integral jewel of Spanish history. It became a symbol of the glorious past and the idea that medieval Spain was a meeting point of cultures, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish. The Spanish poet Francisco de Icaza famously wrote, "Dale limosna, mujer, que no hay en la vida nada como la pena de ser ciego en Granada." Give him alms, woman, for there is nothing in life as sad as being blind in Granada, reflecting how synonymous the beauty of the Alhambra/Granada is with the essence of Spain's splendor. The Alhambra along with the Great Mosque of Cordoba and Seville's Giralda, eventually came to stand for the sophistication of Al-Andalus and thus became part of the broader Spanish self-image, that of a country bridging Europe and the Islamic world. In 1933, Manuel de Falla, a great Spanish composer, even staged a celebrated concert in the Alhambra's patio of the Arayanes, using the atmosphere to connect modern Spanish culture with its Andalusian roots. Today, the Alhambra's image graces everything from Spanish tourism posters to the 2011 Spanish euro coin, a mark of how centrally it figures in the national heritage. Architectural influence. The Alhambra has directly inspired architecture around the globe. In the immediate centuries after its construction, one can trace influences in North Africa. For example, the 16th century Saadian tombs in Marrakesh, Morocco, show interior decor that recalls Nasrid forms, likely because craftsmen and ideas flowed from fallen Granada to Morocco. Saadian buildings imitated the courtyard of Lions style, and Muqarna's vaults as an homage or continuation of Andalusi artistry. Later, in the 19th century, European Romanticism sparked a Moorish revival in architecture. Designers like Owen Jones, a British architect, studied the Alhambra in detail and published plans, elevations, sections, and details of the Alhambra, 1842 to 45, an influential work that disseminated the palace's design principles widely. After this, an Alhambresque style became fashionable. One sees it in structures like the Court of Lions replica at the Crystal Palace in London, 1854, or the whimsical neo-Moorish synagogues in Central Europe, such as the Dohani Street Synagogue in Budapest, which borrowed Moorish elements to evoke exotic grandeur. The Alhambra Society in the UK and France fostered interest in Moorish decoration, and Alhambra-themed rooms were created in mansions. In the Americas, the influence was no less. The Granada Theater in Santa Barbara, California, or the so-called Alhambra houses in early 20th century U.S. suburbs copied details from the Nasrid palaces, scalloped arches, tile work, courtyards with fountains. Even in Turkey, during the late Ottoman period, a style called Ottoman Orientalism incorporated motifs from the Alhambra thanks to global expositions and publications. Sultan Abdulaziz, after seeing Owen Jones's work, reportedly styled some palace rooms in imitation of the Alhambra's intricacy. Through these and many other channels, the Alhambra has contributed to world architectural vocabulary, symbolizing the romance of the Islamic West. Literary and artistic legacy. Washington Irving's Tales of the Alhambra, 1832, has to be singled out as a literary legacy. It not only revived international interest in the Alhambra, but also added mythic dimensions to it. His stories of enchanted Moorish princes and hidden treasure forged the popular image of the Alhambra as a place of mystery and gentle ghosts. This work influenced other authors. For example, French writer Chateaubriand had earlier referenced the Alhambra in his own romantic musings after a visit, and later the American poet Edgar Allan Poe was fascinated by Irving's accounts. Poe even set one of his tales in a mythical palace reminiscent of the Alhambra. In the 20th century, the Spanish poet Federico Garcia Lorca, a native of Granada, wrote poems that invoked the Alhambra's gardens and the spirit of Andalusian legend. Visual artists, too, were inspired. Owen Jones, aside from architecture, created pattern designs directly copied from Alhambra tiles, which influenced the decorative arts in the Victorian era. The Alhambra's aesthetic even had echoes in the music world. The classical composer Claude Debussy wrote a piece for piano called La Soirée dans Grenade, Evening in Granada, that tries to capture the ambiance of a night at the Alhambra through musical impressionism. Francisco Tárrega, a Spanish guitarist, composed the famous tremolo study Recuerdos de la Alhambra, Memories of the Alhambra, in 1896, a piece full of rippling arpeggios that evoke the feel of the palace's fountains and the nostalgia of its history. It remains one of the most beloved works in the classical guitar repertoire. Such artistic tributes in music and literature show how the Alhambra transcended stone and plaster to become an emotional and cultural symbol capable of moving people who have never even seen it in person. Cultural symbol of coexistence. In today's context, the Alhambra stands as a monument to the idea that diverse cultures can create extraordinary beauty together. Spain now often promotes the legacy of convivencia, coexistence of Jews, Christians, and Muslims in medieval Spain, and the Alhambra is a centerpiece in that narrative, even though, ironically, it was built in a time of relative isolation. Its existence is due to the prior presence of multicultural Al-Andalus, and it embodies many influences. For instance, some of the craftsmanship in wooden tile was likely done by Mudajar, Muslim artisans under Christian rule, as exchange of artisans happened. UNESCO recognized this multi-layered significance, listing the Alhambra and Generalife as World Heritage in 1984, and also emphasizing its connection with the neighboring historic quarter of the Albaicin. On UNESCO's World Heritage website, the site is praised as an exceptional reminder of Moorish Spain and the influence of Islamic art. It's frequently highlighted as a symbol that European and Islamic civilizations have intertwined destinies, an important message in a modern world that sometimes posits them in opposition. The Alhambra's splendor undeniably came from that interweaving of knowledge. It benefited from Persian garden concepts, Roman and local construction techniques, and the creativity of many peoples in Iberia. Tourism and economy. The Alhambra's legacy also has a practical dimension. It essentially underpins Granada's economy and is one of Spain's top tourist attractions, often vying with Barcelona's Sagrada Familia and the Prado Museum for visitor numbers. Pre-pandemic figures show around 2.7 million visitors per year. These visitors generate revenue not just in ticket sales, but in hospitality sectors, and the Alhambra has become an icon that draws people to explore other heritage in Spain. City planners in Granada ensure that sightlines to the Alhambra, like from the famous San Nicolas Overlook, are preserved because the image of the Red Castle with Sierra Nevada mountains behind is a key selling point. The challenge has been to manage this tourism sustainably, a legacy problem of any beloved site. The Alhambra pioneered timed ticketing and limited daily entries, currently around 300 visitors per half-hour slot for the Nasrid palaces, to prevent overcrowding and damage to the fragile stucco and tile. This model of preservation balancing tourism has been studied and emulated elsewhere, so the Alhambra also leaves a legacy in heritage management practices, ongoing scholarship, and inspiration. Academically, the Alhambra continues to fuel research. Art historians probe into the techniques of its artisans, the use of geometry, the making of alicatado tiles, etc., while conservation scientists study its materials, for example, analyzing the original pigments in the stucco work, which has led to high-quality restorations where missing sections are carefully colored to match historic tones. Epigraphers are still deciphering and interpreting the many Arabic inscriptions. In fact, a comprehensive catalog of all Alhambra inscriptions was only completed in late 20th century by researchers like Jesus Bermudez and others. Each generation finds something new or reinterprets something in the Alhambra. For instance, contemporary architects sometimes cite the Alhambra when designing climate-sensitive buildings, noting how its courtyards, water features, and ventilation ideas naturally cool spaces, a very relevant aspect for sustainable architecture today. In popular culture, the Alhambra appears in films, novels, and even video games as an exotic and beautiful locale. For example, it featured in the film Assassin's Creed and in the game Granada, Sultans of the South. These modern references keep the Alhambra in the global imagination, ensuring that its legacy isn't static but evolving. Emotional and spiritual legacy. Perhaps the hardest to quantify is the personal impact the Alhambra has on those who visit or even just learn about it. Many describe experiencing a rare peace or contemplative calm when walking its grounds. The interplay of light, water, and intricate art in a space scaled to human proportions, not overwhelmingly large like some cathedrals, can create a deeply moving experience. Over the years, people of various faiths have found the Alhambra spiritually touching. Muslims see it as a jewel of Islamic heritage. Christians and others often simply feel the presence of something greater in its beauty. The palace has, in a sense, fulfilled its designer's intent to instill serenity and awareness of the divine. That atmosphere persists despite throngs of tourists. By night especially, when fewer people remain and the fountains are lit, one can still have that meditative, almost prayerful experience as in Nasrid times, gazing at the stars from a quiet courtyard. In this way, the Alhambra's legacy includes being a pilgrimage site for beauty, not in a religious mandate, but in the human need to seek and be uplifted by sublime beauty. As we conclude this extensive journey through the Alhambra and Generalife, it is fitting to reflect on what a unique legacy this is, a medieval Islamic palace in Europe that has transcended its origins to become a universal treasure admired by all and a source of lessons in art, architecture, and intercultural respect. It stands as a testament to the enduring power of human creativity, to use words similar to those of UNESCO. Though regimes and religions changed, the Alhambra's allure only grew. Conclusion: the eternal allure of the Alhambra. In the stillness of a modern evening, as the last visitors depart, the Alhambra rests under the Andalusian sky, much as it has for centuries. Silent walls crowned by stars, the fragrance of myrtle and orange lingering in the gardens, and the soft music of water ever present. The red towers and verdant courts of this palace have witnessed the full sweep of history, the triumphs and pleasures of its Nasrid builders, the sorrow of their fall, the alterations by new masters, the decay of neglect, and the revival by those who could not bear to see such beauty. Lost. Today, Safeguarded and celebrated, the Alhambra lives on as a bridge across time and culture. Walking through its precincts, one feels a gentle continuity. The marble basin in the Court of Lions still overflows with water, as pure and glistening as the day Ibn Zamrak's verses were carved around its rim. The Hall of Ambassadors still catches the morning sun, illuminating the very throne niche where sultans once sat in state. The Generalife's reflecting pools still mirror the summer moon, just as they did for Boabdil on the eve of his exile when he gazed one last time at his beloved palace. The voices have changed. Today they are the voices of guides, explaining Nasrid art to curious travelers, of school children marveling at the echo in a domed hall, of artists attempting to sketch an arabesque. But the ambience of tranquility and wonder remains the same. In a world often hurried and fractured, the Alhambra offers the gift of pause. It invites us to slow our step, lower our voice, and attune our senses to the subtleties of light on carved stucco or the rhythmic lapping of water in a stone channel. In these moments, one can almost sense the presence of those who conceived this place, as if their spirits linger in the stucco's poetry and the garden's breeze. Indeed, the Alhambra has become a universal language of beauty. A visitor from any corner of the globe, of any faith or background, can stand in the Court of Myrtles and feel a profound sense of peace and balance. The architecture and nature speaking directly to the heart without need for translation. Scholars might analyze its proportions and inscriptions, but even the uninitiated feel its impact intuitively. It is the art of the Alhambra to hide deep meaning in forms that appear effortlessly delightful. As the 19th century traveler Richard Ford wrote, "Not a panel, but has the labor of an angel, not a room, but might be the dwelling of a seraph." Such is the spell it casts that hyperbole often slips through from the tongues of those who try to describe it. For Granada, the Alhambra is the ever-watchful guardian, a pearl set in emeralds so eternally gazing over the city. At dawn, the first light paints its walls pink and gold, and the city below stirs to life. At dusk, the call of birds from the Albayacin mingles with the sound of the Alhambra's fountains, as if the palace were breathing along with Granada. The monument has also taken on the role of a beacon for cross-cultural understanding. School programs bring children of diverse backgrounds here to learn not just history, but the value of cultural fusion, seeing how Arabic, Latin, and Hebrew inscriptions found side by side in Alhambra, artifacts mirror the cooperation that once existed in this land. The Alhambra thus educates not only about the past, but about possibilities for the future, that from diversity can spring unprecedented creativity and beauty. As the night deepens, picture the Alhambra empty, its great wooden doors locked until morning. The fountains in the courtyard of the Lions play on, silver in moonlight, and in their gentle splashing one might imagine the whispers of bygone poets. The lines of Ibn Zamrak still adorn the basin. Such a pearl as this palace is should only be set in the finest of emeralds. The palace stands as that pearl, and the dark mass of forest around it, the emerald setting. In the quiet, one can almost hear the refrain, "Wala Galib Ilallah," echoing faintly off the stucco. There is no victor but God, a motto that has outlasted all who wrote or read it, reminding us of the ephemerality of human glory and the eternity of the divine. Yet, in a sense, the Alhambra achieved a kind of immortality. Through art and harmony, the Nasrids captured a piece of heaven on earth, and though their dynasty ended, that piece of heaven remains for others to experience. This is the Alhambra's greatest legacy, that beauty and knowledge can transcend the limits of era and empire, touching the souls of generation after generation. It is a gentle rebuke to the notion that might makes right, for here it was artistry that proved strongest of all, surviving where swords and titles fell away. In our deep journey, we have peered into its history, wandered its courts, glimpsed its daily rhythms, deciphered its symbols, and followed its fate through the ages. But no amount of description can fully capture the meditative serenity of being present in the Alhambra itself. That is an experience one must have individually, to feel the polished marble underfoot, to smell the orange blossoms, to run one's fingers along the cool alabaster columns and trace the delicate lines carved by masters long gone. It is then that the Alhambra truly speaks, not in words, but in the universal language of awe and tranquility. As we conclude this script, imagine standing in the patio de la acequia of the Generalife at twilight. The water channel bisecting the garden reflects a band of deep blue sky, and the arches of the pavilion frame a perfect view of the Alhambra across the valley, its towers now softly illuminated. The city noise is hushed. In that moment, time seems suspended. Past and present merge. One could be a 14th century courtier awaiting the emir's arrival, or a modern traveler lost in reverie. The atmosphere is the same, timeless, calm, and faintly dreamlike. This is the meditative, sleepy aura the Alhambra imparts, lulling the heart into a peaceful accord with its surroundings. It is easy to believe, as local legend has it, that the Alhambra is enchanted, not with dark sorcery, but with the enchantment of human genius in harmony with nature. And so the story of the Alhambra and Generalife continues, written anew by each person who walks under its horseshoe arches or listens to its fountains. It is an unfinished story, as living monuments always are. The Red Fortress on Sabika Hill will doubtless watch over many more centuries, inspiring future poets, artists, and dreamers. The Nasrid palaces will continue to teach us about the heights of artistic achievement and the depths of spiritual yearning. In an ever-changing world, the Alhambra endures as a sanctuary of beauty, a gentle guardian of memory, a paradise on earth that invites us, whenever we are weary or in need of inspiration, to step inside its walls and let the timeless water, light, and poetry wash over us in a healing, illuminating slumber. As the inscription above an Alhambra doorway aptly says, "Enter thyself and forget the anguish of life." The Alhambra remains ready to welcome all who seek its solace. In its reflected pools and whispering chords, we may yet find a piece of our own inner paradise.